Mega City 1. 800 million people, and every one of them a potential criminal. The most evil, violent city on Earth. But God help me, I love it.
Coming to you direct from the nerve center of the galaxy's greatest comic. This is the 2000 AD Thrillcast.
Borag Thungathlids, and welcome to the latest episode of the 2000 AD Thrillcast Lockdown Tapes. I am your host, Malchar, and I hope you're having a decent start to your March of 2021 and the lockdown isn't getting to you too much. This week, we've got quite the oral feast because not only have we got an episode of everyone's favourite podcast, the galaxy's greatest podcast, the Thrillcast, we've also got the launch, finally, of the Penguin Random House audiobook adaptations of 5 2000 AD classics. You've got Judge Dredd America, Judge Dredd the Pit, Slain the Horn God, Halo Jones, and the first 3 books of Brink. And these have been brought to life by an incredibly knowledgeable and skilled team. And we've got just 2 of the people involved on the Thrillcast this week. Kate McDonald, who's studio manager at Penguin Random House, and Chris Thompson, who's a senior producer. And it was a really interesting chat because the question that came up when we announced these audiobook adaptations was, how do you adapt a comic book? How do you, what's the point of stripping out the artwork? Isn't that just, such an important part of the whole experience? Absolutely. But Chris and Kate have got some really interesting thoughts about adaptations, how you bring these stories to life in a different medium, and some of the challenges that they overcame to bring them to a much, much wider audience. And the feedback so far has been absolutely fantastic. So looking forward to seeing what everyone thinks of those. Got Kate and Chris chatting away in a moment. We also talked to Dan Abnett and Ian Colbard, who are the team behind Brink, obviously. We've had them on the podcast before. But they talk about Brink, but also about their views on audiobooks and how the two can possibly meld. We've also got some words from Pat Mills, the co-creator and writer of Slain, who got interviewed by Penguin Random House. So we decided to bring some of those comments over to the podcast. So hear his thoughts on the adaptations as well. So quite a bumper episode to prepare you for tomorrow's launch of the adaptations on Audible. Make sure you go along to 2000ad.com to link straight through to Audible. There'll be a nice big plump news item on there with links for you to follow. Should be really, really interesting. It's always great to have ways of bringing 2000 AD to new audiences. People who wouldn't necessarily pick up a comic book but listen to a lot of audiobooks. I listen to a lot of audiobooks when I'm working, so it'd be fantastic to see what the feedback on these is. So without much further ado, let's talk to Kate and Chris from Penguin Random House about the 2000 AD audiobook adaptations. Cool. I guess let's start off by you both introducing yourselves. Kate, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Kate. I'm the studio manager at Penguin, and I manage the production of all 5 productions, as well as composing the music for Halo Jones and the 2 Judge Dredds as well.
And I'm Chris Thompson, and I directed Dredd the Pit, Dredd America, and Halo Jones, and did the sound design for Dredd America and Halo Jones. I think that's it.
Is that all?
Yeah.
Well, I guess the first question I really want to ask you, and it's one that an awful lot of people asked when we announced that we were doing these, which is, how do you do an audiobook of a comic book?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's something that I guess we were sort of filled with, if you'll pardon the phrase, dread from the beginning. I don't know if that's a joke that someone's made on this podcast before, but there we go.
So many times.
Really? No, I mean it's a scary prospect. The way we did it was the first sort of point was we need to pull all the text out of these. That's the first thing. So Kate, bless her, had fun pulling all the text out of those dramas and putting them literally flat on a piece of paper. Well, not a piece of paper, in a Word document. And then we basically had the task of turning these into what essentially turn out to be sort of drama scripts. So what we did is we then had the comic alongside, so the visual and the text, and we went through literally panel by panel, and anything that wasn't in the text, which in the case of the comic there's quite a lot, we had to make a decision. Okay, how are we going to render that in audio, and or if there's the odd tweak here or there to make it work. There's some things that don't work, but I mean, I think the one thing I would sort of say is that we have been quite hard on ourselves in the sense that we've been really faithful to the original. We've changed. If anything has changed, it has been because there is no other way of doing it. But I'd say there's probably maybe in all the 3 dramas that I directed, there's maybe 5 instances of change. The rest of it is absolutely, really stuck to what's in the visual, basically.
Yeah. I think for me, it kind of all started with, as Chris said, writing everything. I was trying to come up with a smart way to get all the text out of it, and in the end, just had to write it all down. And I essentially, there's so much text in there that it did actually lend itself so well to a script. Also, just amazing to be able to go over in so much detail and write everything out. I think I kept sort of thinking it was my own life and having really weird in-depth dreams about the stuff that was in all of them, but it was absolutely amazing. So that was the sort of the starting point. I do think we learned along the way as well. We were completely figuring out how to do it as we went, because it's the first time we've ever done something like this. So it was amazing.
Because the art, as many people pointed out, the art is so important to comic books. They are a unique art form in that respect, that they use words and pictures. But I guess an adaptation for an audiobook, particularly when you're using a soundscape, a full cast, it's a different way of doing things, but not wholly dissimilar, I guess. And the process you've described suggests to me that they're a lot closer linked than people will perhaps think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. Kate and I were talking about this just earlier today, actually, that I mean, I feel like certainly the way of it, so we had the script to work from, and then we recorded all the audio. And in terms of the design, it ends up being a really visual experience, because if you want to bring something that's in motion to life, then you've got to give it motion. And so much of it, as listeners will discover, is constantly in motion. But it's more than that. It's also that perspective is constantly changing. And the way I've designed them is very cinematic, in the sense that you might change perspective within a conversation. And obviously, as a listener, that's great, because it gives you an opportunity. It means you've really got to hang on to know what's going on. But it also, I mean, I think Kate, who's one of the few privileged people to have heard these at the moment, will say it does work. It intuitively works. And as I say, it does end up being a very visual experience. That's the whole gig of audio anyway, that we are filling the gap, basically, the visual gap. But we're just lucky enough that I've said before, we're standing on the shoulders of giants, this amazing work and these amazing visuals to be inspired, but more than inspired by, to be able to recreate, basically.
It's really pacey, and I do think, oddly, I think when we first started, we were wondering how it was going to translate to audio, but the pacing of the panels actually just translates really well to audio. And I think, there's a lot. When we were originally putting the scripts together, I was putting quite basic cues, as if there was something that wasn't obvious in the text that was going on. And then Chris kind of expanded upon that later. But I do think that that maybe what I didn't notice about comics before is that the text is also just so important and so supportive of the whole thing, that I think it was just a testament to how much the text and images kind of are glued together and fused, and they really support each other in a way that meant that when we were making the scripts, they sort of just came to life on their own. So yeah.
There's another nice sort of parallel with visual, which is with comics, obviously you've got simultaneity, so you can have two scenes happening at the same time. You can be in two different locations at the same time. So there's a really good scene at the beginning of Dread America when the TV studio is being stormed, and off to one side you've got Dredd being called in. Well, in audio you can do that. You can have two things happening at the same time, and it's funny, the people who've heard it, which numbers probably about 3 or 4 people at this stage, all of them say there's a real comic book feel there when you've got two images alongside and you're sort of piecing it all together and you understand that it's all happening at the same time. But again, I think that's the thing that's really, I suppose, is quite surprising in some ways, because it does really lend the analog between the two is actually, pretty neat.
One of you mentioned that you were learning about the process as you went along. I mean, these are let's group the Judge Dredd ones together. These are 4 very different kinds of story. As the process went on, did you find yourselves becoming a lot more confident in the choices you were making? Was it a case of, by the time you got to, I don't know how you do it, whether you did it one after the other or all together at the same time, but by the time the process was starting to come to an end, you felt you had much better ideas, and most importantly, was there anything that you learned that you would have gone back to the beginning and gone, actually, that this would have made our lives easier?
I think, one of the big things I learned that I definitely became more confident as I went along, as I was quite involved in a lot of the casting for the kind of small, not the major roles, but a lot of the like medium and smaller roles. Because with your question, did we do them all at the same time? Yes, we did. So basically, I think we figured out, aside from those maybe like 20 big characters, we had 350 roles. So that was part of the script creating process, was figuring out exactly how many characters they were, how much they'd speak, writing up tiny little profiles for literally every character we came across, which was fun, but a lot of work. And then we were kind of trying to figure out, because we had to do them all at the same time and we couldn't get 350 people in, unfortunately, how we were going to do that. So I think that was a big puzzle process that as we went along, I sort of became more, I don't know about you, Chris, but more confident that I just knew the characters inside out. So we had obviously actors that were sitting across all 5 dramas, playing different characters, and it was like piecing those characters together. Like, I think a really good one, finding versatile actors as well, but a good one is Jeff Harding plays Guthrie in The Pit, but also Louise Cannibal in Halo Jones, and they're 2 very different characters, but they sort of chimed as we were reading and trying to cast them, and Jeff was the sort of perfect person to kind of pull them together. And there are some really unusual combinations there, and I think it's also just a testament to versatile voice actors and sort of what they can do. I think we've got like Nicholas Khan plays Buell in The Pit, and also Anish and Brink as well, so 2 very different characters again. But I think that was something I definitely learned, is that as we got sort of deeper and further into that recording process and we were picking up people and bringing them in, just being able to kind of trust that we knew the characters really well. But that kind of took time anyway. I think you sort of had to sit with them for a while. I don't know about you, Chris. What you thought about
I think you do. Like, you read it once and you make sure you know what's going on. And then apart from anything else, they're so layered. There's so much detail. There's so much intricacy in them. I guess that's the whole beauty of reading comics anyway. I remember as a kid, you'd read them, maybe 50 times, and the 50th time you'll find a little drawing detail or something that will give something away that you hadn't even occurred to you. So there's an element of that. The other thing I would say, actually, that in post, certainly it's been really hard to actually find a sort of one way fits all way of working, because each one throws up completely different challenges. So Dredd is it's the gunfights, really, the fights, the punch ups, all of that takes a while, because you've got to know pretty much whose gunshot is going off at every single point, because if you don't know, you can be sure the listener won't know. And so you've got to construct that narrative, realize it, make sure it works, and if it doesn't work, as I mentioned to Kate the other day, you've been an hour and a half's worth of work and start again. That's I suppose was the challenge with Dread. And I sort of approached Halo, which we're sort of putting the finishing touches to now, with all of that experience, because I'd done the design and the mix for America, and found that it's completely useless, because most of the challenge with Halo is locations. They're constantly changing locations, and you stay with this sort of group of people, and you've somehow got to, whilst they're speaking, give the listener the cue that, okay, we've changed space now. And that's without talking about, what I was saying earlier on with simultaneous scenes. The scene where Toby is chasing Halo down the corridor, and then you've got Toy Molto with her date at the party, and then she bumps into Glyph in the corridor. I mean, it's just, to try and sort of keep all of that together and somehow make it all, sense to someone who might not have, the visual cues that we have. It's the locations was a real challenge. So yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of tricks that we've picked up, and various ways of working that will definitely serve us well next time we have to do this. But I mean, it has been a learning process, and I suspect next time it will throw up some different challenges that we couldn't even imagine now.
One of the things I did want to ask about was music and SFX, because you do have to create, I guess, a kind of aural landscape that evokes really quickly the location that people are in. Talking about Halo Jones, was that a particular challenge because some of those locations are so completely wild and alien, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a dual thing. On the one hand, because it's otherworldly, you can get away with a lot more perhaps, but it's got to make sense and it's got to be coherent. So it's not good enough to just sort of piece together weird sounding stuff. It all has to work together. I guess no, with Halo it was harder actually, because there was more to establish. With Dread, there are sort of those the generic things. If you got the bike right, if you got the guns right, then basically you're okay. And obviously you've got the soundscape around Mega City 1. But I think with Halo Jones, you're constantly having to relearn it. I mean, I'm currently mixing a bit in the third book on the planet Puak or Puak, whichever way you want to pronounce it. I mean, we had to, and that was, you sort of get to the end of the second book and you think, okay, we've established it. It's gonna, and then you're completely thrown off. And then not only that, in the first sort of section of that, with where Brunhauer is describing where she's been. He's sort of describing, I think there's probably about 3 different worlds that get mentioned in that first speech that somehow we have to evoke for the listeners. So yeah, no, I mean, it's a real challenge, but I mean, it's also just amazing. I mean, imagine having to try and make trees scream convincingly. I mean, it's incredible. Like, imagine that as a job.
They do sound pretty convincing, though. I'll say that. I think they're really good. On the music front, I thought Halo was. I started with Halo actually. That was the first theme that we wrote, and I think I really like the kind of unknown spacey element of it, and we went down a kind of, I call it like a space cowboy route for her little kind of coming of age journey, and so for each one we started with a theme, and then we kind of built on that, and I was then writing to each scene. As they kind of came out, we had a bit of a back and forth. So Chris would kind of make a scene, send it to me, and I'd write to that. But and I think with Dread, as you say, it was maybe kind of there were some more existing tropes around Dread, which made it slightly easier. But also I found it was quite a tricky brief. It's sort of walking the line between that sort of kind of, I don't know, like almost a bit patriotic, but not patriotic, because it's not about that. It's not about the kind of same patriotism that we think of at the moment in America, and but also maybe a bit of a sort of baddie vibe, but ultimately like there's some bits of good in there. So it's trying to just walk that line. I mean, I hope it's worked, but that was quite a fun theme to write as well. And we've got basically one Dread theme, but in completely different styles. Like I think both the Pit and America have completely different aesthetics that we tried to sort of tweak, but there is a thread running through them, which hopefully kind of ties them together quite nicely.
Yeah, we approached America and the Pit sort of slightly differently. I feel like we went a lot more in the sort of comic-y aesthetic for the Pit. I guess it was partly led by the fact that while we were working on the first sort of putting together the first scenes of Dread America, the Capitol was being stormed. And we thought, well, you know, I don't know, it definitely felt like this could afford to be set a lot closer to home. And I think there can be a temptation to sort of go, oh, well, this is just this other world that's, you know, I mean, that's the whole point of science fiction. It mirrors, you know, elements that are true, but sometimes it's a bit too close for comfort. But no, I mean, I think that, you know, America lent itself very well to having a bit more of a realistic, serious treatment. And actually, I think Joseph Fiennes was a really good sort of the man for that job, because obviously we wanted, as I say, we wanted to slightly play against that. And we've got the Pit. Kate and I sort of went through for the first time, start to finish last night, and it's just it made me breathless. It is so fast paced and so what's the word, hyperbolic from start to finish. It just doesn't stop. I said to Kate, it's like you want a bucket of popcorn there and just to sit there and not breathe.
I actually did have popcorn yesterday when I was so there you go. It's cinematic.
Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about is just thinking back to the list of roles that you both listed at the beginning of our chat. I mean, how do you do this process? You know, it just seems like, you know, it's such an involved thing, and clearly you can't just kind of chop it up and say, well, you do that one thing and you do that one thing. It's much more holistic than that. How does it work?
So, I mean, from a purely kind of technical perspective, when I originally did it, I mean, a lot of the characters have names. A lot of them I was just naming on the fly, like sort of man in something or something like that. So there's a lot of weird, definitely things that I can imagine the creators never intended for them to be called that, but that's what I called in the script. There was a lot of, like, quite interestingly, I especially think in Slain, this was really hard, was bits where we were really trying to have to figure out who was saying what, because sometimes there are bits that are left deliberately a little bit vague or not, or just a little bit more, they're so visual that you just want to make sure you get it right. So I was literally writing scripts and having to, I think like some of the technical stuff I was having to do on Word was actually just like ridiculous. I kind of never want to revisit that again because it was so complicated, and I figured out at the end a way easier way of doing it that I was like, oh no. But aside from that, we kind of pulled this list of characters, and I think it was, for me, it was just a case of we actually were moving bits around, so I split it into, I think we had maybe 19 actors across 350 roles. I think there were maybe some roles in the comic that I think we paired up a couple of the one-liners into sort of one character, but ultimately, like, everything was really faithful, and there's different voices for kind of every single thing that's coming in. And I just had a list of characters, and I honestly sat down and I wrote kind of a sentence about each character, so maybe like a rough age, whether they were male, female, or something else, or whether, you know, they were this kind of creature. So we've got some like Proximans in Halo that are there, just anything really to give us an idea, or even if it was something that wasn't that identifiable, something that would kind of complement it. So if it was a scene where there was a completely unidentified crowd member and we just had loads of men speaking, like, maybe let's make that role female just to kind of complement and balance it out. So did that, and we were moving bits around the whole time as we kind of became more comfortable with the characters, I think. But what I was really pleased about doing it this way, because when we first said we were going to have a bank of actors across all five. I said Rich, who's worked on Stain and Brink, was a bit like, oh, I didn't really think about doing that. And actually what's really nice is that it's meant that actors can come in and they've kind of engaged with all five scripts, and it's just an amazing opportunity to kind of engage with such a breadth of 2000 AD's work. So I think they all really enjoyed that, and everyone got really into it. I mean, everyone had access to the comics, and everyone got really into it, which was brilliant. And it's also, I don't think that many people, there were some people came in with interesting ideas, but I do think what's really interesting is that I found a lot of the time the actors were coming in, I don't know about you, Chris, and doing something that we were like, that's exactly what I thought it would be like. Which is really nice. And sometimes there were changes. I mean, I think Kristen's Swifty Frisco was she did a bit of a brilliant twist on that. I love that. That's great. So I think it was just an intuitive thing, as you say, like it's quite holistic and kind of, as we were kind of puzzle piecing everything together, it just sort of fell into place. I don't know if maybe I'm making it sound easier than it was.
Yeah, you definitely are.
Yeah.
There's a lot more method behind that madness. No, I mean, I think that's definitely true in terms of, and I think that actually as a director, it's really nice to have a visual cue to give someone. So if someone says, how should this person sound? Just look at him. He's got tusks. Well, and that really helps, I think, because giving an actor a steer, then it definitely helped. And I suppose the other thing as well was also this thing of trying to make sure that that yes, they did come up with their own choices. The majority of them had some fantastic ideas. That's the best position a director can be in, because all you have to do is just choose what you like and throw away the stuff you don't. I think we've been really, really lucky to work with such a wealth of actors.
Well, let's talk about those casting decisions, because I've had the good fortune to be an ear in the room. I've been able to hear what's going on in terms of casting without having to deal with it. Joseph Fiennes as Judge Dredd, I not casting any aspersions at all in any way. I genuinely never thought we'd be talking about people of that caliber and of that profile. I'm a big old fan of Shakespeare in Love.
So different.
Yeah, a little bit. So in terms of let's talk about Joseph for a second. Was this his first go at audiobooks? Was this unusual for him? I don't know whether he's had any particular experience with this kind of production.
I couldn't say with any certainty whether it's his first go with audiobooks. What I'll say is that the first conversation I had with him, one of the first things we talked about was what's our take on Dredd, what do we want him to sound like, what's his motivations and all that. And my my main take, actually, having by this point worked with Dredd for a while and being quite familiar with Dredd, was that you sort of don't dislike him in spite of the fact he's actually quite cold, and he's just pragmatism taken to extremes, basically. And actually, if you follow that logic, then you can buy into it. And actually, to me personally, as a kid, when I heard about Judge Dredd, I wasn't really into them as a kid, but I knew about the character, and I was just like, why is he on the front of the cover? He sounds horrible. But as an adult, what I really admire about Dredd is that he's got principles and he sticks to them. And my wife will tell you I'm just as stubborn as Judge Dredd in terms of principles. And I think that was my way into sort of, the character in terms of understanding it and sort of, the way I pitched it to Joseph was that we need to like him because of his convictions, basically. So, it's what he says in the comics, the people know where I stand, basically. That's the way he feels. So we talked about that. And then, of course, we talked about Handmaid's Tale and Fred Waterford and the commander in Handmaid's Tale. And I thought, well, that's actually a really good parallel. That is exactly the conflict you feel when you see Fred Waterford on TV. You sort of think, well, yeah, you hate him. And yes, he's a monster. but but at the same time, he is entirely convinced of his ideals. And I think, I think that was a really nice parallel that we found with Joseph.
Because you've also got Sheila Atim as Halo Jones, and I kind of can't express how excited I am about listening to her in the role. What was her take on the not just the role but also on the process behind the audiobook?
Well, Sheila was super prepared. She sort of knew the book back to front by the time we sat down. I think the great thing about Sheila is that she's got an innocence to her, or certainly is able to play the innocence. And I think, the sort of idealism of the early pages of Halo Jones. I think that she really captured that. And then, of course, the first thing we started talking about is, we've got to take her from that to this, the depths of despair and cynicism by the end of it. She absolutely nailed it. And she, apart from anything else, I always feel for the actors coming into this, because particularly Halo Jones, the language in that is, staggering. I remember the Swifty Frisco was an interesting one as well, because obviously it is so full of all this stuff. And it's like, okay, obviously all of this has to make sense to us. And it's obviously everything is referring to something in the real world, in inverted commas. And so we had to make sure that we understood every single thing that they were saying. And some of it is just a joy, because sometimes you spot stuff, that you didn't, again, it's what I was saying earlier on, you didn't spot the first time around. As Sheila had really sort of got her head around all of that and was just coming in to do the job. She was absolutely fantastic. And of course, on top of that, because they're dramas, there's a whole lot of physical stuff happening as well. So, I think I must have seen about 15 actors die in the process of these, or fight or be strangled, you name it. In fact, I had poor Joseph shadow boxing in the studio because there's this really long. I think there's a long fight at the end of America with Grice, and I said, right, Joseph, here, I need about 45 seconds of really gruesome fight noises. He said, should we save that to the end then? I said, yeah, okay, no problem. And he did it, and it was fantastic. I mean, the commitment of the actors. And the same goes for Ellie Kendrick, who played Toy Molto. Her death lasts, I don't know, in real time, it must be about 15, 20 minutes. But, it was just superb. It does take a lot of commitment. And the actors would come out absolutely exhausted of those sessions. And then you sort of feel like, well, then, you've sort of done a good day's work. If that's the case. But no, they've all been, that's the one thing, you can't sort of half go into these. You've got to really commit, because you've got to buy into the whole premise.
How did lockdown affect these? Were these still being done in person or online?
Well, I think needless to say, it threw up some technical challenges, but we're lucky enough to have someone who I can see on my screen right now, Kate McDonald, who's an absolute genius, and managed to make it. I mean, really, lockdown was not a big part of it for us, in the sense that it didn't become the story. It was just, a side thing happening on the side that we had to work around occasionally. But no, I think we're lucky enough to have someone like Kate, who just resolved everything.
Yeah, I think by the time we started these properly, we were 11 months in, towards, I don't even know how many months into lockdown. So I think a lot of the big challenges we had, we'd already battled in other kind of work earlier in the year. So I think, with lockdown, it's just that you've got to kind of keep calm, carry on, that old kind of thing. So I don't really think it featured too much in these. I think there were some odd kind of things that we had to solve, but ultimately, I think the result it is amazing. Sounds great.
When you're living and breathing, death and violence and the democracy under threat every day, then, lockdown feels a bit, I say that, as I say, we had the Capitol being stormed halfway through recording, but anyway.
As we often have to say on Twitter, Judge Dredd is a warning, not a manual.
Yes.
But what's your main aim as a producer when you're working with an actor? Do you try to be hands-on, or is it a case of just finding that equilibrium between the two?
Yeah, I mean, my ethos is whatever people come in with at the beginning is going to be something you've never heard before. So you have to give them a chance to open with that. That's the first thing. And if it's good, then you've struck gold and everyone's happy. Most of the time, what the struggle is that you have in your mind, particularly if you're doing the sound design as well, what this is all happening on the background of, and what basically what they're acting against, basically. And most of the gig is making sure that there aren't going to be any bum notes in there, essentially, and that whatever they do is a choice that works and that's going to sort of really chime really well with the universe that's around them. And again, I mean, I think that's the thing. The universes are so intricate. There's so much there that if you know what you're talking about, then, as Kate said, after a while, you know the stuff back to front. There's no real. It's not difficult. It's an effort, but it's not difficult. So I guess that's the first thing. I'd also say it's sort of a trust thing as well. It's what I was saying earlier on about actors needing to really throw themselves into it, heart and soul. There has to be an element of trust there, because if you're saying to someone, okay, right, really, make this sound like you're being strangled, and the actor is bringing themselves to the point of gagging, then there has to be a trust that, like, this is worth it, this is going to work, it's not going to sound stupid in context, it's absolutely going to work. And I think that's the main producing gig, working with actors, is making sure they trust that well, first of all, make sure you communicate your vision to them so they know what they're fitting into, but then also, again, giving them the trust that that if something isn't going to work, then you'll tell them. And I've worked with a lot of actors who will tell you that I do tell them if something's not right. So yeah, but no, I mean, it's just been so much fun. And there's some of the more surreal notes I've had to give in my life, like, can you scream in slow motion for me, or that sort of stuff. It's just it's pretty crazy. And as I say, can you box for 5 minutes on mic for me?
Yeah, I think having so obviously Chris directing these and doing the sound design, and Rich, who directed Slain and Brink, also did the sound design for those, was a real asset to the production, because it meant that they could kind of orally visualize exactly what they wanted to kind of make, because there's so much of it are those reactive noises and the sort of the punches and the kind of that's the like pillow that all of the action sits on. So I think having them involved as directors just made a massive difference, I think.
Is it quite in terms of the process, is it quite intensive? Is there a big team beyond you two working on these, or is it a case of all hands to the pumps, This is a blessing and a curse, because it is essentially just me. Certainly for Halo Jones and Dread America, the sort of the team is me and Kate and Duncan, who did the casting. For Pit, we got a brilliant sound designer on board, Sam Gunn, who's done a fantastic job on that. But really, it is quite like that. That's the extent of it. But I mean, I think that's. As I say, a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, it means that we've been pretty busy for the last 5 months, but on the other hand, there's a consistency in the product. It's essentially me saying to Kate, okay, this is what I want the music to sound like. Can we make it sound more bleak here? More bleak, still more bleak. And we get there. There are that you end up with a vision that's consistent. And actually with sci-fi, that's quite an important factor, I'd say, that you want the vision to be consistent.
Yeah, I also think it's helped, whilst it's been big job and a lot to do between a handful of people, it's helped because we can just have conversations about weird points and we'll understand it. It's not like, I don't know, I feel like because we're both so deeply in that world, like it really helps. Like, I think one of my favorite bits that I actually sent a really zoomed in screenshot. It's in Halo Jones. Brynner is listening to
oh god, yeah,
John Cage Atonal Avenger. It's amazing. It's like you zoom in and it's this like, you can see the picture and it's like what looks like bark, like stabbing John Cage with a treble clef or something. And I was just like, that is just the most incredible detail. And so we had quite a long, there is that features in the background. Like we have made a bit of a feature out of it. I mean, most people probably won't notice it. I think it's absolutely hilarious. but it was one of those things that, for that we had like just a whole phone call about that and how we were going to do it. And it's just being able to kind of talk really frankly about sort of bizarre things. I think if you had a massive team, you wouldn't really have the opportunity to be having those in-depth kind of intense conversations about that sort of thing. So it's been a really bizarre but amazing time.
I mean, you talk about it being a 5-month process, but correct me if I'm wrong, quite a lot of this has been a really tight turnaround. I mean, we only confirmed that Joseph Fiennes was going to be involved. It seems like only a few days ago, but what is time at the moment? And these are coming out the beginning of next month. I mean, that feels incredibly quick.
Yeah, to be fair, I do think that's maybe the one thing lockdown has made a lot of that a bit more complicated, maybe timing wise, but I think it was also a learning process as we went. And audiobooks in general, the actual just sort of more ordinary audiobooks, tend to have really tight turnarounds. And because we're obviously waiting for a book to be finished and before we can even record it, and then we have a tiny gap before it publishes that we have to do everything in. So I think maybe we're quite used to those tight turnarounds. But yes, I agree. It does feel like quite a lot that we've achieved. I think I was looking this morning, because we're obviously listening to The Pit, at the comic again, at the graphic novel, because I have looked at it quite a lot, especially at the start. But having listened to the finished thing and then looking at it again, because I was sort of figuring out how best to split it up so that listeners can kind of correspond to the actual like comic, the each one as we go along, and I was just like slightly blown away about how much content there is. And I had a weird flashback to the first time I opened them. I can't even remember how long ago that was, and I was like, oh my god, how are we going to do this? But now I'm like, oh my god, we've actually done it. That's insane. So it's been a tight turnaround, but it also feels like I can't remember a time that I wasn't doing this.
I mean, I'd also say I genuinely believe that the people we've mentioned, the 4 or 5 people we've mentioned, are, I mean, the best. I realise I'm including myself in that 5. The best people at this. I mean, we really do have a really strong team of people who've got lots of experience of doing this. So yes, I'd say it has been one of the tighter ones that we've had to do. But I mean, it's I don't think it's suffered in any way. As I say, I'm completely blown away by the stuff that I've heard from Rich, the Slane and Brink. The sound design on The Pit has just genuinely, it's a gut punch in a good way. It is so good. It's really staggering. So at the end of it all, you can't really worry about that. And I know that once the last one goes in, none of this will matter, because we'll be so chuffed to have done something like this. Apart from anything else, it's the honor of being trusted with something so important that so many people absolutely love. But I also feel like we have really given ourselves a hard time over it, in the sense that we've not really compromised on anything in terms of keeping as much as physically possible in the dramas that are in the comics. And
I mean, I guess you've already mentioned at least one of these, but are there particular points that you're very, very pleased with, or that were, as you said, a bit of a gut punch when you actually got to hear them in situ?
Kate, do you want to start, or do you want me to start?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I've got a couple. This one's less of a gut punch. I think something that the first piece of music I composed was the tune for Missing Planet Boy, which is the Ice 10 hit that features throughout Halo Jones, and it crops up like again and again. So it's one of the first things, because we recorded Luke, who sung it, really early on. So that was the first thing I actually wrote, and like created like a rock kind of scene for it as well. And then just hearing that crop back up again with different, there's even one bit I think where Chris got Ellie Kendrick to sing it in the shower as Joy Malta, just like trying to weave it through. I love that. I think it's so great, and it's that was really fun. But I do think maybe, and I don't know, Chris, if you're going to mention this, but the Moab war zone with the slow-mo, that was my favourite bit of music to write, I think, was that, because it's the sort of the first time they're in this kind of slow motion. There's like, you know, the gravity is affecting time, and you just got to do some really fun stuff with that. So I think for me that was that, and aside from Atonal Avenger, which is one of my highlights for sure. Yeah, I'd say they're my favourite bits.
Yeah, I think the beauty of that scene, so the scene on Moab is when they first go into the crush, and I think it's the first proper battle that they have there, which was such an interesting brief from a sound point of view, because one of the first things we learn about Moab is that sound waves can't escape its gravity. So you sort of have to think, okay, how are we going to make this work, and you know, what's it got to feel like, basically. And so the one thing that I wanted is a sense of claustrophobia, because obviously they're in these, Halo is in this gravity suit, and so it's designed from her perspective, and you've got her narrating over the top of it. And there is so much to do there. We had, I mean, you know, the screaming in slow motion, the sound of a gravity suit imploding, and, you know, a human being being reduced to a puddle of, well, just a puddle. All of that, rendering that in audio, it's such a busy scene, really. There's so much going on, and the performances we got were absolutely staggering in terms of making it, you know, really making it work. And then I gave it to Kate, and I said, look, there's not much room on this. There's, you know, there's some music in there already, which I'd put in, but what I do want is something in the higher range. And, you know, it was just sort of the icing on the cake that I was expecting. And she sent me through her music, and it was, I was just gobsmacked. She completely, I mean, and this has happened a number of times, I would say, with Kate. She's got these strokes of genius, and you just sort of think, that's it. That's completely tied this thing up for me. I don't know if it's something we've even ever talked about, Kate, but the use of a female vocal,
I was going to say that,
inspired, because obviously with Halo Jones, we're looking at a feminist piece of work. And the female vocal we hear throughout in the music, but in this bit it was so poignant, because obviously you've got this sort of platoon of women going into, you know, the worst war zone possible. And it was just staggering. Well, I remember listening to that and thinking, that's by far for me the best thing that's come out of this whole thing. And that doesn't mean the rest is not amazing, it's just that one really hit me. So there was that scene, definitely. I completely agree. That was a really good one. And now I'm going to struggle to think. There's just so much to choose from. I think the beginning of Dread America is really good fun, because you're thrown in straight into a sort of hostage situation, and the tension of that, and the delivery of the essentially the suicide note, that the letter from Hester Hyman at the beginning. Again, it's this thing that I think it works really well as a rendering of the visual, because as Hester's speaking, she's describing these various scenes. There's a moment where she talks about her and Gort's kid hitting a judge with a ball in a park somewhere. We have that in the audio. And again, that's mirrored in the music. Every single point we managed to hit. So no, I think that really works. And what I really like about that, as I've realized in terms of feedback from people who've now heard America, not many people, 4 or 5 people, the tension starts there and it literally doesn't stop for 2 hours. And actually Dread America, now I think about it, feels like one scene, because it literally does not stop. It's so relentless, but also so lean. I think that's probably the thing I appreciate the most about Dread America. There is no fat on that script at all. It is just pure action from start to finish. And it's politics fundamentally, but there are the human stories in there. I think there are some fantastic bits in Dread America proper, the love story with America and Bennett Beanie. I think that is really fantastic. And again, such a challenge to sort of have someone having their throat shot out, and then thinking, okay, how are we going to make them sound? Again, like, I guess, yeah, we ended up with a mixture of actor performance and sound effects. But it's just, I don't know. I think for me, that middle part, America in Dread America, is probably my favorite of everything, just because, I don't know, it's the perfect mixture of the human story and a bit of action, and some, I'm just going to trail this, some inspired music choices from Kate. That really was a gobsmacking moment. You'll see when you get to America, you'll see. I think that was just an absolute joy to behold the whole thing. And again, like, it's a bit, I guess the most satisfying thing is that, I think I said this to Kate the other day, the gap between my vision and what's there is actually probably as small as it's ever been in my career. Pretty much what's there is what I'd imagined. And that's a testament to the actors. It's a testament to Kate's music. It's a testament, I suppose, to me being able to render what I'm imagining in sound form. But it's been absolutely staggering, really.
In terms of, these apparently have been pre-ordering very well. Everyone's very happy and excited. In terms of potential follow-ups, you've already kind of picked some of the most ambitious series we've ever done. We've talked a lot about Halo Jones, but of course, Slaying the Horned God is just such a massive epic. How do you follow up on that? How do you sort of go, well, this is the height we're going to go to next?
It's much too soon to ask that question. I really don't know. Kate, feel free to jump in. I am just, at the moment, just so delighted to have realized these three visions, certainly. Whatever can be thrown at me next, will be just a joy. I think that's the main thing to take away from it, is that, it's just, we're so lucky to have been asked to do them. I feel like we're equal to the task, but I do think it's such a privilege to call that your day job, basically. But no, I can't. Couldn't possibly tell you.
Yeah, no, I'm the same. I do think some of the more ordinary projects that we do will pale in comparison to this. So I am hoping there'll be more. I'm sure there'll be more. But as you say, we did manage to pick the most iconic ones straight off the bat. So yeah, I'm hoping that they'll be brilliant and everyone will want loads more, and then we can just continue churning them out. I say churning, it wasn't a churn. It's much more than a churn, but yeah. So here's to more, I think, if we can. But I'm not sure exactly what would come next.
I think it's safe to say that we've absolutely loved it. It's like the gig of a lifetime. It's easily the biggest project I've ever worked on, but also the most creative I've been able to be in a long time. It's just been so much fun.
Well, it's been really nice to kind of, from my distant point of view, watching this come together and working with the marketing team and everything have been great. But it's one of those things that adaptations can be so much of a mixed bag. Particularly when something is so well established. Less so with Brink, which is, I think, out of all of the five, the one that immediately made me think, oh yeah, that will really work as a full-cast audiobook. Of course it will. But it's going to be interesting seeing people's reactions to what is an adaptation. In exactly the same way that a TV or a film adaptation will bring something different or something new. It's going to be interesting to see how people react to these.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that, I was asked before, actually, when we were chatting to someone about these, do you feel the pressure? And, of course we feel the pressure. We know that the people who love these tend to absolutely love them. And, there's something very personal as well. Having sort of read a comic, then you have an idea of what that sounds like in your head. And there's always this sort of gap. I guess the only possible response to that for me is that as long as you apply that pressure to make the best possible adaptation you can, and to really stick to the detail and to be as faithful as possible, then there's nothing else you can do, really. And as I say, I think for me, they work really well as standalone dramas. So as someone who's never, let's say you had a listener who'd never who'd never read the comics, I think would absolutely love them. But I also like to think that, just think of the challenge of trying to come up with how Toby the dog's going to sound, I think I can't imagine Toby any other way. But then I'd argue, possibly some listeners or readers would say, well, I can't imagine it any other way than the way I'm imagining it. But I really feel like, certainly for us, we've been pretty strict on ourselves to try and, to approach as much as possible the sort of the universal ideal of these things. That's the best we can do, I think. And I think we've, as I say, as listening experiences, really, I can't tell you the amount of times when I've been mixing, I've realized I've been holding my breath for the last 30 seconds. And that's usually a good sign. And I think I realized this the other day, everything I do, every decision I've made is based on a gut feeling. And either if I basically don't stop mixing until I've got that feeling in my gut saying, yeah, that's it, I've got it, and then you move on. I think if you can trust it, that instinct is going to sort of, well, to be accessed by all these people, then that's the best you can do, really.
Yeah, and I do think we've completely fallen in love with these over the process of doing them. So I think, as Chris has said, we feel the pressure because we love them too, and we want to do them justice. And I do think, actually, strangely, they are adaptations. They're also interpretations, and also I think the audio medium works so well because we're not constrained by having to cut it down to fit it into a feature length thing. We are completely, it's literally word for word the comic and everything that's on there. So we've not had to make any decisions where we're like, no, let's cut that bit because it's not that important or anything like that. It's and I think for the sort of person and also listener that I am, for me that's an honor because I've definitely watched films of books that I've loved and have been in sort of pure sorrow for a bit that I loved that they cut, and we haven't had to do that, so it's great.
No, we haven't. That's true.
Brilliant.
Yeah, I when the pre-orders went up, I saw the time timestamp, how long it was going to be. I was like, oh, okay, so that's pretty meaty. I like an audio book that doesn't leave before you've got your money's worth. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, Kate will tell you, make sure you are watered and fed before you sit down and listen to one, because you won't be able to get up again.
Yeah, I was really hungry when I was proofing one of them, and I was like, oh, no, I'm just going to keep listening to the end.
Super. Well, many thanks to Kate and Chris for that fascinating chat about the process of turning comic books into audiobooks. Next up, we have Pat Mills, who, he doesn't need much of an introduction on the 2000 AD podcast, but Penguin Random House interviewed him for their publicity, so we thought we'd bring some of his comments into the podcast. Great to hear from creator of 2000 AD and co-creator of Slain about the adaptation of Slain, the Horn God.
I have a slight confession. I think I don't want to position myself as someone with a deep knowledge of 2000 AD all the way through from the early days. I remember the first time I picked up an issue in mid-90s, I think, and I have to say I hadn't realised that you were the creator of Charlie's War as well. Which there's some panels that are burned into my brain from that that freaked me out as a schoolboy. So this is quite an opportunity. But I think what we wanted to get into, I think, was Slain mainly, sure. and really. The kind of the advent of it, it's such a different story, I feel, to Dread, to Halo Jones, the other big hitters, I think. What was your ideal sort of initial idea and aim for this when you started out with it?
Well, the idea was actually really humble, and it's like all these things, isn't it? Any kind of creative project, you think, oh, I'll just put something together, it'll be a bit of fun, and before you know it, you're down this endless rabbit hole. So I don't know how far you and your viewers want to follow me on this, but I'll take you a bit of the way down. You can then say enough. Well, how it came about actually was because my ex-wife Angela and I, we were talking at the time about how we should really do something, work on something together, because she's a children's book illustrator, and we thought, yeah, maybe we should do something. And it's just one of those kind of casual conversations, and at first we thought maybe something involving dinosaurs. And then it became obvious that what Angela was looking for was something with a fantasy feeling. And bear in mind, there's some great fantasy inspiration around at the time, notably the works of Brian Froud and Book of Fairies, which is just exquisite. And there was a real feeling of sort of fantasy there at the time. And so we thought, well, maybe we should do something like heroic fantasy. And so we thought, yeah, let's play around with that a bit. And then it was like, I don't know, it was like entering a dark tunnel then, really, because we thought, yeah, okay, we'll play around with it a bit. And Angela came up with some great ideas and so forth. But we realized that to avoid what you might call a charge of nepotism, that we actually had to make it very good. And then I realized not only did we have to make it very good, but we had to make it very, very, very good. Because although it's always, I mean, sexism is always denied, yeah. Well, as much today, if anything is, but the idea of a female comic artist in what is not 100% now, but it's not far off. What is it, about 80, 90%? It's a male comic sandpit, and it was even more so then. But people aren't stupid. They're not going to say anything. But we could feel this resistance to what we were doing, both in 2000 AD editorially and what you might call amongst my peers. So I thought, Christ, we've got to make this really brilliant, because otherwise it's not going to sort of work. And so I really put Angela through the mincer, and I still feel bad about that, because it's one thing to be someone's editor and to say, yeah, do it again, right? But if you're married to that person as well, it's tough. And so anyway, to cut a very long story short, eventually it came out, and Slane was the first story ever to beat Judge Dredd. In other words, Judge Dredd had been this universally popular story, and is beaten by an unknown artist who'd never drawn a comic strip before and was of the female gender. And I thought, well, that's pretty good. I wouldn't mind, not so much for me, but more for Angela, for what I put her through, an acknowledgement of that. And did I then? Not a hope, right? In other words, and I think her reaction was much more pragmatic and much more common sense and down to earth than mine. Because as you can see from the way I'm talking, I'm still carrying a torch for all that stuff all these decades later. And I think she very sensibly said, look, this isn't giving me what I was looking for. There's too much what you might call, kind of ignored, in other words. So she felt like she was out on a limb somewhere. So she said, no, we tried, it didn't work out. I'm going back to children's books. And meanwhile, we had this character that was phenomenally successful, primarily because it had to be successful, because otherwise it's like, oh, what's Pat giving his wife a story for, that kind of thing. And that still went on. So it was like, even though we had proved the success of what we were doing, it didn't matter. It didn't fit the norm. So anyway, moving on quickly from that, that's how Slane came to be. And I think it's a story that's probably got under readers and artists' skins more than anything else, because it had to be approached with a certain depth. So although it's a comic book story, it has, well, I don't know if you can put labels on these things. It has a great deal of depth to it. Let's put it that way. And the artists resonate with that, and I obviously resonate with it, and most important of all, the readers do. And so there we are. We have this celebration of Celtic mythology with Slane.
Did you feel like there's, I mean, you mentioned that pressure to kind of to deliver on it and to treat the subject matter as well. I mean, it was for its time as well, dare I say it? I mean, correct me if you think I'm wrong, but as you say, it's very much seen as a young male kind of readership, and actually you've got something in here that is a very strongly pro-feminist ideology within it. The idea that actually Slane is, a very nuanced character in his balancing of his masculine and his feminine side, with looking to sort of not take power in a way, but to have power in order to to restore a kingdom with a matriarchal leadership. I mean, did you feel that in tackling those kind of issues as well, there was pressure in order to get that right?
Yeah, and there was criticism of it as well. Let me see. How would I? Well, I'm half Irish, and I wanted to understand and make sense of what you might call my Celtic heritage. And to my disappointment as a child, I could have told you anything you wanted to know about Parnell or Daniel O'Connell or the Black and Tans, or all that kind of modern Irish history. But I didn't know anything about Cuchulainn or any of the other great Celtic mythological characters. So it's a journey of discovery for me. So that I think is an important aspect. And as I went on, it became obvious that if I was following the Celtic legends, that they did not conform to the heroic fantasy image that's most popularly related to Conan, who's pumping iron, he's full of testosterone and all the rest of it. And the Celtic legends didn't correspond to that. They have incredibly powerful, dangerous women in it, of which perhaps the best example is Maeve, who turns up in the Horn God. So it was like a journey of discovery. I had to rediscover things, but that was on a macro level. But on a micro level, Angela's interpretation of Slane was very, very important in ways that I think would be taken for granted today. But at the time, they were quite revolutionary. And the first one was, he's handsome, right? In other words, now, if you look at 2000 AD at that era, there are not many handsome guys. In fact, I think I'm right in saying Slane was the only one around. And this was partly because they all wore helmets all the time. So you didn't have to draw the human face. And secondly, and I can remember a scene that Angela drew in episode 1 where she has Slane laughing. And I remember saying something at the time like, oh, he's laughing, because again, if you look at 2000 AD at the time, they're all universally grim. They all have what I sometimes referred to as a constipated scowl on their faces. Now, one shouldn't criticize anyone for that. It's no one's fault, including the readers. But what we found, to put it bluntly, was that characters who had that constipated glare on their faces, those were the ones the readers liked the most. So it's not because, artists or writers or editors are lacking in imagination. We're just going with the flow. And so Angela was breaking, at that time, new ground by having this handsome hero who's not wearing a helmet. In fact, and I would say that's part of the whole feminization of Slane. And to add to that, initially I'd said to her, oh, he's got to wear a helmet, because they all wear helmets in 2000 AD. And so there was, Judge Dredd with a helmet, Strontium Dog with a helmet, and doubtless others elsewhere. I'm going to admit to a week, but I have a guilty feeling it was longer than a week. So for at least a week, she was designing these extremely good helmets. And I'd say, no, that one's not right. That one's not right. That one's not right. I'm going to admit to a week, but as I say, I fear it was longer. And then I said to her, you know what? Maybe you shouldn't have a helmet at all. I said, draw him without a helmet. So she drew him with, I think, some of her own anger in there. And it's the image that comes up in episode 1, and you see it in various forms later, including in the audio story, The Horned God, where he says memorably, "Kiss my axe." I think that just about sums it up. And so there was a lot of emotion there. And another thing I should say as well, we were looking around for who should we base Slane on, and we based him on a number of sources, but what was important to us was that he should not be a Schwarzenegger character, who after all was very much the icon of those times, and still to a certain degree is, with pumping iron and all that kind of stuff. We based him on someone that both Angela and I knew, a guy called Ray Morganson, who worked on a building site, and he was kind of handsome, heroic. So he's shifting bricks and things, but he is not, he's not pumping iron. In other words, like a lot of tough guys that you see around, they don't have to be all, with the sort of muscles coming out here. And some of that is all reflected in the character, and I think leads to, if not a feminization of him, certainly an heroic and very human level. And then finally, I should add, and it's a big subject, around that time, there was a lot of recognition of both in paleontology and I don't know, is it paleontology or prehistory, whatever it is, of the cosmic goddess. In other words, that the Bronze Age and Neolithic times, a goddess was worshipped. And once you accept that, so you're accepting the archaeological evidence, and then you're combining it with the mythological evidence, you have this naturally very strong feminine thing coming through. And I think there was even there was a kind of psychology book I read at the time called I think it was actually called The Horned God, which explored the idea of male heroism without the kind of traditional stiff upper lip approach. And I think you can see that very clearly in one scene in The Horned God, which I'm looking forward to seeing how that adapts in audio, where they're saying, right, so, the bad guys are coming this way and they're coming that way, and we haven't got this and we haven't got that. What are we going to do? And Slane says in response, I don't know, which is not what heroes normally do. They normally say, right, to the battlements, this, that, and the other. And it was just acknowledging that a fallibility, that heroes can on occasion be fallible. And to do that in comics is quite different and a bit daring, I think. So I was very what should we say, abstemious. I'm very careful with just how much of it I introduced into the story, because you put too much of it in and the readers are going to go, whoa, 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 whoa. You know, we want to, you know, we read comic books because we want proactive macho heroes. Well, Slane's proactive, but there is that feminine side. So all of that had been building up before I got to the Horn God. In other words, I've been exploring this over probably, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, I would think, maybe longer. And that was the Horn God really pulls all those forces together. And so we end up with this, what I think is sort of described as probably a sort of feminist saga. It was certainly influenced by a lot of feminist books on archaeology. The one that springs to mind is, I don't know if I can pronounce her name correctly, Monica Zhu, who wrote a book on, I think, called The Great Cosmic Mother. And that was a major influence on the story. Yeah.
There's that sort of point where she, where the Earth Goddess sort of says, you know, sometimes I'll be your mother who holds you, and there's sometimes I'll be your lover who will stab you in the back. You know, it's not, you know, specifically that she's not a sort of, you know, even when, you know, when exploring her character, it's not, you know, she's not simple in the way that none of them are. Pat, could I just ask you very quickly, would you mind just moving to the right slightly, because I think we've
sure.
slightly in terms of the frame.
Okay. Have I been? I've slightly been. How's that? Is that better?
Yep. I think that's
okay.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So, it makes me think, actually. I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that you kind of got into Slane as a way of kind of exploring part of your heritage. Why do you think? And correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels to me like Irish mythology is something that it's just sort of underserved and underappreciated even in the fantasy genre, or perhaps that's just me not being widely read enough. But do you feel that's the case? I mean, Viking mythology, for example, I can think of umpteen different sort of, you know, sort of mainstream adaptations of that.
Yeah, that should be better. Oops.
Are we back again?
No, we're gone. You should come back.
Yeah, let me just
hang on. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Right. Okay. I can move if I need if you need a better connection. I don't know if there's any. I don't know, James, if you can tell if it's my connection that's loose or not.
You've both gone a little bit fuzzy.
I can hear you both, but I can't see you.
Right. I can still see you actually. Let me.
You can. Oh, hang on. Let me see if I can. I'm reluctant to press anything in case I cancel you out. I might have to come. Let me see.
Actually,
just try that. Hang on. No. You there?
You're okay now. Yeah, you're okay now.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Cool.
That should be better. What happened was I have 2 routers, and when it connects with oh, hang on, you've gone again. Wait a minute, what's happened there? Yeah, it's okay. We're sorted. Sorry about that.
No, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Did you catch any of what? Where did we get to? I think I was asking about.
I lost you on that question.
Right. Right. Yeah. So what I think where I was going was that you had used it as an opportunity to explore part of your heritage, the Irish mythology.
Yeah.
And I think my point was, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, and I'm just simply not widely enough read, but it feels as though Irish mythology is quite underserved particularly in terms of fantasy, but sort of wider, really. Do you feel that's the case, or do you feel, did you, or correct me if I'm wrong? And why do you feel that might be the case?
No, you are absolutely right, and you're turning over an interesting stone. In very simple terms, if you consider all the Nordic myths and legends, like, I don't know, Beowulf or Anglo-Saxon and Viking mythology, Odin, Thor, and so on, is very straightforward and easy to follow. Celtic mythology is not. It kind of goes like that. It goes all over the place. I mean, really. And I think it's fair to say that a lot of academics have translated Celtic myths from the original, and they've often had real problems with it. And it's fair to say, I think, that it perhaps takes a poet to translate those myths and to make sense of them, because they meander. They don't have the structure that all of us are used to. The 3-act structure of drama or whatever. We're so used to that we expect it, and you will get it in Nordic myths to some extent. In Celtic myths, you won't, and so that's one of the reasons they've been neglected, because sometimes they veer into, shall we say, fairy stories, and then other times they're really bloodthirsty, and they're often bombastic and sometimes even quite stupid by our criteria. The 4 Ancient Books of Wales, which was translated by someone called R. Skene. I remember Skene said towards the end of his life that he'd spent so many decades translating these books, and he realized he hadn't made sense of them. I mean, that's a hell of an admission for an academic to make, that he poured, let's say, 10 years of his life into translating these things, and he more or less said he got it wrong. And if you read those 4 Ancient Books of Wales, the Welsh Celtic poetry, very close to Irish poetry and Irish mythology, they do, you're thinking the original writer is saying something and you can't quite grip what it is. And so, yeah, there's a problem with it. And the problem, I think, is really focused on in the character of Cuchulainn, who is the Irish equivalent of King Arthur, I suppose. And the stories are, Slane is very much kind of a way of simplifying the Cuchulainn stories. And I was commissioned by the Irish Film Board to do a screenplay on Cuchulainn. And the chap who commissioned me said, warning me, he said, we've got shelf loads of screenplays of Cuchulainn. Why they wanted another one, I'm not sure. But I suppose it's sort of like every 5 years or so, they'll try again, right? And he said, because, it's finding a way to interpret it. And because they were quite impressed by what I'd done on Slane, I think they thought I might crack it. Well, arguably I did, but inevitably there it was on the shelf with all the others. And probably in the next 5 years, there'll be someone else who will try to get it through. And of course, it depends not just on the quality of the screenplay, it also depends on the actors. And I suppose ultimately, if you want it to be a big budget movie, which Cuchulainn should be, and the same applies to Slane, it's how far Hollywood gets it. You know what I mean? And you probably don't need me to tell you that Hollywood often doesn't get these things. It thinks, yeah, well, what's it all about? Actually, on the subject of that, and I think Irish people listening will bristle like I did when they hear this. There was a Hollywood producer who at one point tried to put together a Slane TV, she wanted to do a Slane TV series. So she got me to do a kind of TV Bible. And I remember her saying, some of these names, they're a bit of a problem. Can't you change them to something? So we're talking about names like Neve for example, which is written Niamh, and so on. But for her, with what you might call a Hollywood sensibility, they were a stumbling block. And so she was really suggesting I kind of simplified these things down, which if I had done, would have got me killed by the Irish audience. So, yeah, I don't know how we got over those things. I don't think we did. And again, it hit a stumbling block because the stories are exciting and so on, but they don't have, you know, I think we're a lot of us are used to fantasy when it's been kind of processed, as in Game of Thrones. So it's kind of designed always for a modern audience, whereas Slain, it's a rebuilding of the past to say, okay, let's try and make these stories accessible to a modern audience, but let's not compromise or not compromise too much with the original material.
Is that the sort of thing that draws you to fantasy in particular? The idea that you can explore these sort of themes, but you have to work hard to actually, you know, I mean, what's the best fantasy that you sort of, you know, in your opinion, is that?
Well, you see, I like, I think I like the, I always like original sources, whatever they are, whether you mentioned earlier Charlie's War. So I would find myself reading the original accounts of life in the trenches in preference to fictional versions. And it would be the same with Celtic myths. I tended to prefer the original legends rather than a synthesis of them where they've been kind of processed in some way. And you could argue I'm doing exactly the same thing myself. But what I tried to do, notably with The Horned God, was to actually give the reader all my sources to say, this is where this whole thing came from. This is what inspired me to write this story. So it was, again, coming back to The Horned God, it's particularly another important source, which was a nightmare to read. But you were asking about, if you like, where do I draw on my fantasy? Robert Graves' The White Goddess. Now, anyone who hasn't come across Robert Graves' The White Goddess, you know, good luck with reading it. It's a tough read, but it's a really important read. But I don't know, it's not like, say, a modern novel where you can whip through it in a few days or something. You know, you've got to read bits of it, and then you've got to go away and think about it. And essentially, what Robert Graves is saying, and it all ties in with this kind of earth goddess that's at the heart of the Slain story, is that language was originally a language of emotion and poetry rather than prose. And he goes on to try and back up his rather, not far-fetched theory, but extreme theory with examples. And somehow all this relates back to Celtic myths. As I say, we're a long way away from the very structured order of Nordic myths with Valhalla and all these kind of things. And of course, the pronunciation, Irish pronunciation is well, you've got to have Irish relatives like I have who pick me up every time I get it wrong. So, I mean, for example, what would you say, the Celtic equivalent of Valhalla? Now, if I was to pronounce it in English terms, it would be Tir-na-nog, but it's not. It's pronounced Cernanuk. And you know that it's not an easy one to understand. I mean, we're used to, say, looking at French or Spanish or German and getting a rough idea how things are pronounced. But when you come to Irish, it's a different thing. And this is ancient Irish, which of course it only bears some similarity to modern Irish. So,
It's definitely, it feels to me like that actually plays into Slain's strengths, actually, because it's almost, it's got that sort of dreamlike state, actually, I think really adds to it in a sense of, you know, a time before, you know, sort of modern time. I think that's a sense of it being a sort of a strange, almost in its own dimension, really, in a way. Actually, is actually plays to its strengths, really.
It is a magical world, and it's magical without the. I think an awful lot of modern fantasy has elements of Tolkien and elements of Robert E. Howard, and it's only recently I discovered the source of where they themselves acknowledge their source. Their source is an author called Lord Dunsany, and I think he's rightly regarded as the father of modern fantasy. And I only came across him about 2 or 3 years ago, so I actually felt quite deprived. I thought, why didn't I read this guy as a kid? Do you know what I mean? Because every fantasy author you can think of acknowledges their debt to Lord Dunsany. I think Tolkien does, possibly C.S. Lewis, certainly H.P. Lovecraft does, Robert E. Howard, Michael Moorcock, Neil Gaiman. I was thinking, God, I never read this guy. I had a deprived childhood. But in a way, that's been good, because it means that, if you read Lord Dunsany, you can immediately see how he inspired these great authors. You can say, yeah, that's got a feeling of so-and-so. But because I hadn't got that, all I had to start with was these original raw Celtic myths. So it's actually worked out quite well for me in a strange kind of way.
With the I know definitely H.P. Lovecraft tends to refer back to Dunsany, I think, in some of his stories. But yeah, you're right. It's one of these authors that's just the sort of father of modern fantasy, and no one's heard of them. It's
extraordinary, and it probably works against him a bit, because his stories are available free on. You can read them online, and there's reams of them. And somehow, if you get something for free, it's not the same. If they reprinted it with a cool modern cover, and charged 15 quid for it or something, they're probably selling droves. But we can get that free,
Yeah, I missed out on that one. No, there's definitely an opportunity there. Going back to the process of sort of getting Slain from sort of your imagination and the work that Angela did in actually creating the character on paper, as it were. What's the kind of how you mentioned that was a pretty interesting experience in doing that, but where would you start in terms of turning because obviously comic books have this massive visual aspect to them. How do you work with an illustrator to bring a world to life like that?
Right. Well, the way it ultimately comes down to is it's a comic script is no different really to a screenplay. Except that certainly on my comic scripts, they are more detailed, more complex than a screenplay, insofar as I will describe everything in detail. And I'm not alone in this. I think Alan Moore has the edge on all of us, where his scripts are famous for having descriptions that long, because he really needs to set the scene up the way he sees it. So if you like, technically, that's what it comes down to. But in terms of where do you start, how do you go forward on it? I suppose I use Cuchulainn as a role model. And when I first read about Cuchulainn, I thought, I don't know, he seems a very remote character. And then I came across an Irish poet, Kinsella, who's did a version of the Táin. Again, Irish pronunciation Táin. In English, we would say Tain. So it's the words there's nothing intuitive about the way you know, there's no leads as to how you would pronounce this. And I looked at the inside the book. I think it was an Oxford University Press in association with an Irish publisher. And I saw that it had been reprinted, I don't know, let's say offhand, 15 times in 5 years. And I realized why. It's a student's book. And it obviously had something really good, because what's going to attract students to read a book like this? It obviously had something that all the other rather staid accounts of Cuchulainn didn't have. And so that pushed me along. In other words, that gave me, I thought, well, if this is appealing to students, in other words, it's become almost an underground student classic, if you look at the number of times it's been reprinted. And so that gave me the feeling of how I could make this character appeal to a young audience, i.e. a comic book audience. But it was a lot more than that. There had to be something in the story that was very different to Cuchulainn. I had to have a different kind of magic about it. And that came about through what you might call technique, plotting device, where I have Slain with his sidekick, Ukko, and Ukko's always trying to lure him into all kinds of criminal activities. And that was quite important, because normally the hero is always doing brave things, right? Well, okay, he's always, you know, rescuing beautiful women from, you know, evil ogres who've got them trapped in dungeons. And we're thinking, okay, we've seen all this so many times before. Why do I want to add to this mythos? You know, what can I say that's different? And I thought, okay, so Ukko leads him astray. He leads him into situations that no self-respecting hero would ever get involved with. And I think one of my favorites is where he uses Slain's money to buy a prison, because he says we can make money with a prison. You know, we can, you know, torture the prisoners and you know, ransom them out and so on. So Slain gets caught up in this. So it's kind of it's challenging all those stereotypes. And there's nothing wrong with those stereotypes, but every so often they need shaking up a bit and challenging. So for example, in episode 1, the original story, he defeats this terrible time monster by cheating, and the cheating comes from Ukko. So again, Conan would never do this, Lancelot would never do this, and doubtless there are some of the what should we say, the more respectable heroes in Game of Thrones wouldn't do that. But Slain does things, and he keeps saying, "I've got to get rid of you," you know, to Ukko. You know, it's time I got rid of you. But he's somehow still attracted to him, and I think that, you know, it's like he's bad company, and I think that's something we all find very appealing. That and it reflects also the strange things about the Celtic personality that you probably wouldn't see in necessarily in other heroic myths, where there's one account where they raid Celtic warriors raid a wine wagon, and you know, they drive off the guards and everything, and then they just sit around getting drunk, and they're caught later. And again, that's so irresponsible and kind of slightly silly, you know what I mean? It lacks the, you know, that kind of, if you like, Germanic ordered structure. You think these guys are a bit out to lunch. And I always try to reflect that where I can in the Slain stories. Some are easier to do than others, not least because the editor will say, why is he doing something that stupid? And I said, well, that's because he's Celtic. It's part of his personality. And he's saying, well, do you think the readers will get that? You know, so, well, it's who he is.
I think I think people have, and I think it adds to his character as somebody who's actually yeah, as you said before, occasionally has points where the great hero doesn't actually know which what course of action to take, and also I guess 2000 AD has always been a sort of a big slice of satire and a big slice of humour as well, and actually Ukko does bring that. I love that bit in The Horn God where. I think is it Nest suggests that actually he should be prepared to be writing the saga for nothing. He has a heart attack at the thought of it.
Yeah.
It's that kind of it's that sort of thing to it. You've got humour and you've got as you say, characters who do occasionally make slightly daft choices because that's what we all do as humans. There was on the sort of satire side of thing, I was going to ask you if you felt that there's some kind of relevance at the moment in Slane's rule as the Horn God is something that he goes into knowing that it has to end at some point, and he willingly goes into it on that basis. Although, as you say, Slane's always has some tricks up his sleeve in that sort of sense. Do you feel like is it pushing it too far to say that there's any relevance to sort of, how the treatment of power today and how we...
there are some, there've always been some elements which I think were as appropriate when I was writing it all those years ago as today. And I try to keep up to date with, it always does have a subtext, which, you have to keep well below the horizon so it doesn't interfere with the reader's perception, but it is what drives me. And I think one of the best examples of that, and it's stated quite often in Slane and certainly in The Horn God, from memory, I think it is every 7 years, after a king can only be High King for 7 years. After that, he has to be ritually killed. And the idea that if you're a leader, prime minister or whatever, when your 7 years are up, it's time for you to go. And they figured that this was a sensible way of doing things. So, that was a lot of fun, I think, highlighting the fact that he's only going to live he's only going to be High King for 7 years, and then he has to die. He has to be ritually killed. And I suppose that also ties in with lots of myths of the hero being killed. But it's at the heart of many mythologies. People have tried to explain the logic behind that, but it's always slightly escaped me. Anyway, it seems fun. In other words, you don't want the guy to be boss forever. And I think, and I still do this kind of thing, even say the very latest Slane story, which focuses on, it's another myth that no one has gone near. And I kept thinking somebody must have done this, but to my knowledge, they haven't. It's the myth of Brutania, which is the original name for Britain, Brutania, which comes from the Emperor Brutus from Troy. And the early stories about him say that he will create an empire that will last beyond time and space. And you think, well, that sounds like the British Empire. So, there's a bit of satire that's gone in there, because there's a lot of myths around the City of London and the dragons of London and so on. So I was able to sort of work some of that in. And I think that's generally going on beneath the surface of all the stories, because I'm not sure all writers, I think, or maybe they do, I don't know. I think you've got to have some kind of subtext. You're trying to say something as you're writing. It's not just about somebody bashing someone else over the head and, getting the gold and rescuing the beautiful maiden and all that kind of stuff. You've got to have something going on beneath the surface. And often readers will say to me, I didn't really quite get that at the time, but when I went back and read it when I was older, I saw why it appealed to me originally, you know. So it's just getting the balance there, so you're not making it too polemical. And on that subject, I should say, when The Horn God came out, there were some readers who said, he's standing around talking too much. In other words, he should be out there killing all the time. And I said, well, you know, it's a 3-act structure. So there's plenty of killing in part 2 and part 3. But in part 1, I'm, you know, establishing the world. And part of that is having to establish this idea of the goddess and the horned god. And I think that's always a challenge for writers, how you get across these rather abstract ideas that could seem like exposition or could be overly polemical. And I think certainly for some readers, they weren't comfortable. They said, no, he's an action hero. He should be killing dragons and killing monsters all the time. So there you go.
Super. Many thanks to Pat and to Penguin for allowing us to run those comments from him. So Dan and Ian are next up on this episode. I mean, they've been guests before, so, you know, no surprises there. Always great value from them both. But because Brink is the newest of the series that's being adapted by Penguin Random House, we thought we'd get them on to talk to them about their views on the story, the adaptation, how they think it works, how decisions they made with the series advantageous to adaptation into audiobook. So it was fantastic to be able to sit down with them yet again, and a big chunk of this chat which won't be included in this episode. Always great fun. But yeah, it was fantastic to sit down with Dan and Ian to chat about the Brink audiobook. So it's not been that long since we had you both on the podcast to talk about various things, but is this? I'm like, what is time anymore? Have we had to talk about Brink before together?
We have talked about Brink, yes,
yeah, we did.
yes, but obviously not about this exciting aspect of Brink. That's the exciting part.
Absolutely. So I've just, you know, the casting announcement is out there about Brink and with the other Penguin Random House audiobook. So I wanted to get your reaction to about the adaptation of Brink, because that is an absolute stellar cast.
Yes, yeah. It absolutely is. When it was before it was publicly announced, and it was announced, it was discussed that Penguin were going to do audiobooks of some classic stories. And first of all, I felt incredibly honoured that Brink got picked alongside the others, because the others were all-time classics. There was no question at all that they would make, you know, sort of those sort of things that deserve that kind of treatment. Because Penguin, as we have clearly seen, does not muck about when it does these things. It's not like we'll get some guy in an airing cupboard to narrate it. You know, this is proper audiobook stuff, and that's lovely. So it was like very nice that the sort of a modern era, a very modern era of 2000 AD was being represented and regarded as something worth adapting in that way. I was also sort of personally chuffed because I think Brink lends itself to that sort of thing. It's very conversational. It's very sort of, as it were, dialogue heavy. It's driven by conversation and character. So I think would make a good audiobook. And I actually got a couple of emails from Penguin asking me a couple of technical questions about how I saw things working in terms of the diversity of the cast and the diversity of accents and stuff like that. They sort of came to me and asked me directly, which I tried to be remotely articulate in answering, and, you know, sort of put out what was sort of a version of what was in my head. And then they asked me about who I would cast. The kind of, just like hypothetical, and which is an exercise that happens a lot of the time, particularly when I'm working on novels and stuff like that. I will hypothetically cast things in my head, mainly to give me a sort of a sort of anchor, I suppose, on which to imagine that character being. You know, if this was a movie, it'd be played by that. So I can imagine, you know, help get your head around a character. Very simple, very sort of shorthand way of keeping track of people. So that kind of fantasy football casting, I was like, sure, yeah. And I sort of wrote up all this character. I put, ideally this character and this character. I was like thinking they'd go, right, that's a great list. Now let's get people who are like that. And off they went. Yeah. And therefore I was just blown away to discover that actually several of the people I had suggested as my number one pick in an ideal fantasy football team choice had made it into the cast and were going to be doing it, particularly Nina playing Bridget. That she is, to me, the perfect person to play that part, you know, in any way, shape or form. And I went, well, it would be somebody like that who's got that sort of intensity, that quiet intensity, and that, you know, she's so good at that sort of thing. That's exactly the way Bridget is. Thinking that would be a great marker for them in terms of who they then got to play it. I was blown away, and I was present when Ian heard the news as well. He's frozen. He's either frozen or he's still.
No, I was just ignoring everybody. I was just doing something else. I was checking out my emails. No, I didn't realise until the proper casting list, you know, the actual cast list, until it actually dropped. You know, for everybody else, that was news to me in a way. So because Dan had mentioned names, and I used to work in television, so I just went, yeah, whatever, that's not going to happen. so I think I sort of shelved it and just went, don't get your hopes up in the way that you normally would do. And then, so it's quite a surprise, actually, when the actual promo stuff came out, to see the full listing. I was like, oh, wow, that's yeah, I didn't think anybody was serious. They were kidding. But no, it's amazing. It's astonishing, the casting.
Really I'm pretty interested in whether when you're doing the series, I quite often hear comic book creators talk about characters, particularly writers, but also artists, talk about characters that they basically base the actors that they base their characters on. So, you know, as they're writing dialogue, for example, they've got a particular voice in their head of somebody they already know. Was that the case with something like Brink, that this fantasy casting isn't just, oh, I'd quite like that person to play it, but also perhaps they were already in your head, as it were?
Well, I think that's inevitable. I think when you create characters, and particularly if you're like me and you end up creating a lot of them because you just write too much, creating characters here. Oh, I've created another character by accident. Sorry, you know, I just the some of those, I think, at least embryonically, are probably based on somebody you saw on television the night before or something like that. However, I can't think of an instance for 2000 AD or otherwise where I have deliberately created a character with an actor in mind. I've not gone, oh, I want a George Clooney type in the story tomorrow. You know, that I've never done that. So the characters are always sort of imagined as discrete personalities in my head to begin with. But there comes a point where I have to try and communicate that to, for instance, to the artist, to Ian, saying that, you know, or communicate it if illustrative material is being developed, or slightly later down the line, if you're doing something that's lasting a long time and you're working on over a period of years, a series of novels, for instance, or a long-running strip like as Brink is becoming, that it's actually quite useful just to have that shorthand note. This character is like this actor. So that's where the fantasy casting comes in. So I don't usually necessarily start with the fantasy casting. That's not like where the ideas come from. But I quickly give those sort of simple hooks in my mind so that when I sit down to do it, I go, oh yeah, that's that, but that's that, you know, so I can hear the voice, sort of get that voice back into my head. So it's probably happening, but it's probably much more instinctive. It's sometimes much later on that there is a kind of recognition. You're sitting watching television one day and an actor comes on and go, oh my God, they make a perfect, you know, suddenly it's that's that thing slotted away. And obviously with a comic, much more than a novel, there is that happens twice. That process is double, because I might imagine a character and I might say to Ian, oh, character X, I imagine will be played by David Tennant doing this kind of voice and blah blah blah, and have these kind of mannerisms, that kind of body language and that kind of stuff. But then Ian might go, right, that's a great place for me to start, but in his head go on to something else instead, so that what eventually comes back as the character on the page is a synthesis of the way we've both seen it, and might be very far away from any or all of the actors that we have mentally cast in order to do that. But I'm sure some people do actually go, I want that type of person to play this role, and then start from there.
I get notes off Dan and I just go, yeah, ignore that, and then
he does. I've seen him do it.
Yeah, you get with Brink, we kind of looked at things like names and stuff like that in terms of, you know, where her design comes from. Like as an example, because this comes up a few times, we'll get a name, and I think it's like Carl Brinkmann is German sounding. I think it's just, you know, I don't think there was a specific note for how they appear really, apart from who not to look like. I think was a note. Yeah, I can't remember. It was
I think early on there wasn't anything.
There was a note of like, just don't make them look like this. Just like, and I can't remember who that was either. But I think but Carl Brinkmann, it was like associations, and so I sort of went. I just basically made him blonde-haired, blue-eyed German. I think I did, but with him it was more like. I think there was a Flash Gordon sort of vibe, but not at the same time. It's like there could be a high school jock sort of thing or something like that, or the football team guy, you know, typical looking hero, I guess, I suppose, but whatever that means. But I think with her, I think it was more a case of kind of just weird like associations of things like Bridget Curtis sounds kind of cold and frosty, and you know, it's got a cool sound to the name. Does that make sense? Am I going in a weird way? And it's kind of like, but also then you look at Curtis sounds like a German name, and then you kind of go Cortez, and that's Spanish. So, and then I think that's kind of like, you know, it's kind of, you have more of a different angle. Oh, the other thing is like with her hair, for example, her hair is very Bauhaus. I remember that, like there's associations with the whole German sounding thing, and then it went Bauhaus hair because it's very angular, and then she's got that very perfect round circle in the back for the bun and the back, and so that's like an entire art movement in her hairstyle. But then I realized later on, for example, that Vidal Sassoon's scissor fringed cut is inspired by Bauhaus, which I didn't realize. So it's kind of weird. But so she has very Bauhaus hair and stuff, but they're not like, in a weird way, I don't want to base them on anybody, but you know, the way that you get this program now with, was it deep learning, where it comes up with faces of people you've never seen before, like that don't exist, that whole thing. So you're in your brain, you're trying to kind of do that really. So you're not really trying to base it on anyone. And, you know, so I think I can remember very early on, an inspiration was I think there was a print from the 1950s. It's a very famous one, called it's either the Chinese Girl or the Green Lady. I think it's popularly known as the Green Lady, right? And the thing with that picture is that it's like, she's got very 1950s style haircut, but the complexion on her skin is like green. But it depends on the print as well, because it comes out blue on some prints, because it's like a different kind of, it's that sort of greeny blue. And I quite like that, because it made me think of the way that everything on board the ship, on board these places, are officially lit. And so the color in the complexion is going to be very different. Whatever environment we go into, it's going to be throwing up interesting complexions on the skin and stuff like that. So there was bits like that. And then characters kind of end up with like blue eyes quite often. I don't know why. Things like that. So it's like you're trying to dig around to come up with a face for some really random, really weird, obscure reason. to kind of put things together, to piece them together that makes sense to you, and then it kind of ends up being that way. And I think some people with the eyebrow on her, they say Frida Kahlo, that comes up sometimes, but she's also got like a gap at the end on one side where she had a scar. My wife Katie, she has a scar, she has like a gap there, and everybody tells her she looks like Katie Puckrick. So it's like it's that whole thing where I think that's what people are thinking they're seeing in the design and stuff. So she's not, I hope she's not looking like anybody particularly. Like she is like she's like unique. She's not based on an actor or anything like that. Well,
I was just going to say, I think one of the things that happens, no matter, even if I was deliberately casting actors in my head and putting it in the script, one of the things that Ian's doing is operating very much like a casting director on a movie and saying, well, they are great actors, but actually they look too much alike. So quite often the way Ian is then visualizing what I may or may not have written in the script is in order for there to be good visual differentiation between the characters in the story, so that visually speaking, that it's going to lift off the page. And I think with Bridget, actually, it's really interesting with the hair and the conformity of the face. I mean, her expression, she is quite expressionless a lot of the time because she is so deadpan in everything she does. It's almost become her head and her face and head and the hair have almost become a sort of logo, like an iconic little symbol, which is absolutely unmistakable, which is really interesting, I think, for a graphic character who is not a superhero and could be reduced that way. That she as a, in inverted commas, normal person can actually has this unmistakable silhouette the moment you see her.
Also, the brow situation, the real reason for the brow of that situation is partly because of the personality, because then when you're doing loads of like close-up face shots of conversation and stuff like that, or trying to get emotion in there, when somebody's brow is like that, there are challenges of it can kind of you're more able to kind of pull off like a more of a deadpan expression, because it's like it's quite a hard thing to get a lot of character into the eyebrows when they're like that compared to other brows. A lot of characters, I have an obsession about eyebrows for some reason. It is all down to eyebrows. If there's some way I can work in an excuse for drawing eyebrows in a certain way, then I'll do it. But it is partly to do with that, because that affects the acting on the character's face and stuff like that. And I didn't want it to be. I don't know. I just wanted it to be quite uniquely different from other things. And I think if you're basing it on actors, you end up kind of just doing it like that actor. And therefore I think it robs something from the character in a way, because there's always preconceived notions of things like how that character will react in the face and stuff. Whereas if you can make your own completely, and things like strong graphic sense in the hair, like the Bauhaus hair thing, but also like the brow and stuff like that. So she's unmistakable if she's in silhouette against other characters. So those things are all design things that don't play well with having to stick to the rigid casting, really. So because you are going to create your own thing out of that, I think.
I'm really interested in because we're talking about an audio book, and I've seen one or two people just go, whoa, what about the art? But of course, the process. You've both... What
do you mean? Whoa! What about the art? What? Sorry. What, in terms of the audiobook, because you're losing the visual side of it?
Yeah, they don't quite understand how audiobooks and comics are going to work. But based on the process that you've just talked about, I think, if anything, that potentially strengthens the distinctiveness of the kind of voices you're looking for in an audiobook, because you guys have got a process going on where visually you don't want people to look the same. But in doing that, you create quite distinct looks.
Yeah, I think the thing with that is that what I try to aim for above all is that you're going for a mood and a feeling. That's why it's like when I'm trying to explain it, it's really hard because I'm talking in abstracts and stuff, which is not going to make much sense. But when they're pulled together on the page, there's a reason for those things being there, and they're supposed to evoke a certain sense. And that you can actually translate to, say, audio or something like that. Absolutely. You don't need to see those environments to hear the sound of it and stuff. I don't think so. I think those things can kind of translate.
I certainly think that the Brink, probably more than anything else, I mean, Brink is Brink is deliberately conceived and written and then executed with the way we execute it. It's about as close to a sort of TV dramatic presentation as we would get in 2000 AD. It comes minus many of the trappings of a normal comic strip in terms of those sort of slightly more larger than life characteristic elements to a character that makes them immediately recognizable on a comic book page. And because we did that, because we wanted right from the get-go to have give it a sort of realistic a tone as we possibly could, it meant that so much more as it were invisible engineering had to go into the characters to make them as memorable in as short a time as possible as a more obviously flamboyant comic book character would be. So we did think about both consciously and unconsciously did think about their personalities as distinct personalities and distinct voices, because it would literally be carried on just who they were, not because they were wearing a particular costume or had particular powers or a particular catchphrase or any of those sort of comic booky things. And I tried to put that into the script, and obviously then translates that onto the page, and then once that becomes a cycle where it pays back, because the more I see of Brink as I'm writing it, the more I am completely convinced of Bridget, for instance, as a character, and I now when I write her, I do not think twice about what she's going to say in that sort of fancy writery way. But I don't. I know the sorts of things. There are certain things she would never say, because that's not in her personality. So it sort of solidified the deadpan nature of it. And it's worth pointing out also that in the early days when we did book one of Brink, and it was sort of an experiment to see if the readers of 2000 AD would like it, whether it would sustain itself, because it was deliberately not doing the things that a 2000 AD strip would normally do. We did have sort of plans for, if it's successful enough, we might do further books. But we didn't necessarily think we'd stick with the same cast. We did think that Brink would be a series of seasons, and each season, in a kind of True Detective style, I suppose, would be about different people in the same world having their own horrible adventures and this kind of stuff. But by the time we got to the end of season one, book one of the strip, Bridget had become such a defined character, this sort of incredibly determined and sort of resolute and intense focus of the story, that we didn't even need to discuss it. It was like, well, we can't leave her behind. She's got to continue into these things. She sort of became the star of it by dint of her performance. You know, she auditioned well, basically, as a character. She came through that process, and that became the thing that became the focus of it. So it took what happened after that. Although we're handling once Brink book one was out and people liked it, and further series were commissioned, we took a lot of the ideas that we had for where we would go with it. But I'm having trouble hearing you. Siri, there's no need to butt in like that in the middle of me talking to these nice people. I don't know what word it is. There's one that always sets it off. Anyway, we took a lot of the ideas and we folded them in, but we folded them into a story that she was at the heart of. It became very different from the way we'd originally imagined that the Brink as a series would go. That is to do with the credit. It wasn't like inventing a good, cool character who had cool powers, and therefore we thought, oh, there's lots more we could do with that. It was inventing a person. And that person that we wanted to stick with, and it was very different from a lot of other things, particularly in this kind of the format of a 5-page weekly comic, where you can't really sometimes get to grips with that sort of thing.
She's also born out of like a combination of her as a character, for example. There's a lot of certain elements in the way that we were talking about the character. There's elements of because I'm effectively acting her to Dan having written her. So when it came to the casting of this, I couldn't imagine. I still, it was quite a surprise when seeing the casting. If you'd asked me for the casting list, I wouldn't have been able to come up with anybody for anybody. I don't think so, because I don't think of it in this quite the same way. And I think she comes out of elements of the pair of us, really. She's like, I think, there's definitely aspects of both of us in that character, I think. But that's cumulative. That's come over the whole of the first book, really. Over the course of the first book, that character came out in the way that she plays.
One thing that, sorry, Siri interrupting Dan has just think of
$1 fine.
I'm looking forward to seeing how they deal with this. Is of course the little technical caption boxes that appear in
Oh yes, we yes. There are a number of things that we've done with the strip that were very deliberate. We there's clearly a lot of world building in Brink, although nothing compared to massive future SF epics. But there's certain things you need to know as you get into it. And one of the things that I said right from the word go was that I wanted it to have that almost documentary fly on the wall camera feel to it, so that we could do away with a lot of the conventions of the regular conventions of comic strip. So there wouldn't be a voiceover, there would be no narrative captioning at all. We wouldn't get any kind of first person narrative following us along and explaining all the ins and outs of whatever it is. We'd get dropped straight into the middle of it, and we'd have to, like any it's a detective story, so let's make the readers detectives too, so they have to figure out what's going on and who's who. And that also meant that the characters, I didn't want characters to talk in any way that resembled that sort of stereotypical, I mean, the sort of thing that I was trained to do writing comics, which is a character must mention, Michael, another character's name in the first balloon, the first time that oh my God, look, it's Ian, that kind of, just so that readers know what that character is called. And that's great. And most people, you don't usually notice it. But with this type of naturalistic dialogue, it would have been really painfully obvious. And the sort of sudden exposition would have been really painfully obvious. So that's where we developed the idea of this. We call it tags, the sort of on-screen captions that explain what things are. And it will be interesting to see how they work. Although I think, like footnotes, it will look sort of almost like audio footnotes. It can fit in there. I think that there are ways of doing it. And obviously later on, because there's quite a lot of story they're going to tell in the first one. But later on, we get instances of things like the issue of swearing, which we, to the consternation of some fans, we just decided that they would swear. We wouldn't have it made up swears. They would swear real swears, but we would black them out. And by the time you get to book 4, that becomes a part of the story, where we understand why they are being censored. But it isn't. So it's going to be very interesting, because as I understand it, and I could be wrong, but as I understand it so far, they're just going to go for it. We're going to get some fruity language in the actual audio presentation of this, until we reach such a point that the censorship of that fruity language is necessary in terms of the story. But yeah, it is. It's weird taking what is effectively the audio track of a comic, the dialogue and all that information, and trying to compress it and represent it in a visual form in a comic, so that it is not doing any of the things that a voiceover would normally do. And then have that to be translated further into an audio where you haven't got the visual to do it with. And now I'm confused. But you see what I mean? It's maybe we have made that transition easier, or maybe actually we've made it harder by taking it further away from something that will easily switch to a storytelling format that doesn't have images.
Do you both listen to audiobooks?
Yeah, I do.
Yes, I do too. I actually haven't for a long time now, because it was the thing that I did in the car. Whenever I drove anywhere, I'd have an audiobook on the go, and I don't even remember where I parked my car, let alone what book I was listening to. And in terms of audiobooks, it was a mix of literally audiobooks. People reading books on what we used to call books on tape back in the 1700s. It was either people reading unabridged audiobooks, or it was full cast audio dramas, which actually I've had experience of writing. Done some for instance, several for Doctor Who, for instance, and that kind of stuff. Where the sort of which have a that can be tremendously effective, even when you're writing stories for something you would normally associate with a visual format. I am a huge fan of radio. I think radio is whilst it seems old-fashioned, is an incredibly powerful and overlooked medium for the presentation of drama, mainly because you are making the pictures up for yourself, and therefore there are all sorts of amazing things you can do. And I mean, I think just as a digression, I think Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which is now been a cross-platform into every possible medium it can be, the best version of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is actually the radio drama version, because what they did with the radiophonic sound effects and everything like that conjured things in the most extraordinary way. It made it both realistic and very, very funny. So I'm a huge fan of doing that. I think the potential of radio or audio is tremendous for drama, particularly for science fiction and for horror and stuff like that, where actually the less you see, the more you're seeing. So I'm a fan. I sort of can't wait to hear this, to be honest. I can't wait to hear any of them.
It's gonna be surreal.
Because it's one of those things where you still see a lot of snobbery about audiobooks. From it basically say, oh, it's not reading, as if the information isn't still going into your brain and you're still not, because it's not your eyes, you're processing it for some reason. But I absolutely take your point about radio, and it's one of those things that you see a lot of now, people basically reinventing something that already existed. And with radio, we've had the podcast revolution, and now everyone's getting into really getting into audiobooks. And it's exactly as you say, radio, into the ears is a great way to tell stories, because it is provoking your imagination. I think what is going to be really interesting is how they do a comic book with that. I know Sandman's already been done, but with the 2000 AD stuff, I think, not casting any aspersions on Neil Gaiman's work at all, but his work is heavy on narration, is heavy on its lyricism. There's a lot of tell with the show, but that's not necessarily the 2000 AD way.
I adapted Lovecraft's Mountains of Madness years ago, and one of the things I did was just cut out all of what he was known for was his flowery verbiage. It's 5 words where one will do, sort of thing. Yeah, and I just cut all of that out, and I put characterization in as well, because there wasn't any. But the little things like that, where it was just a very big a changeover from what he'd actually written, in the original. But I think it's the key 2 valuable things from that was, in terms of adaptation, as with translation or anything, is you have to get the spirit of the thing that you're adapting, and you have to pay attention to the medium that you're adapting it to. There has to be a reason for you telling it in that medium. And so those 2 qualifiers, I think, are the main thing. I think when you're taking anything from one medium to another, you have to kind of take the spirit of what was there, but then there has to be a reason why you're translating it over to something else. I often think about things like, have you ever seen the film Perfume, from the adaptation from Susskind's Perfume? And everybody thinks that's amazing because of the way they managed to convey smell. What they forget about is that Suskind wrote Perfume. It's not a scratch and sniff book. So, he was able to convey that with words. So again, you're taking sensory aspects and then being able to use the medium really sufficiently within what you're doing. So Suskind did that when he wrote Perfume, and then they were able to do that into film because he'd already achieved that by doing it in the book. So I think there's a lot to do with how you utilize the medium that you're translating it to. I think that's a key factor.
I think also what you're saying about the sort of snobbery against the audiobook or the talking book or whatever. I think that honestly is because people forgot that radio existed, that for 50, 60, 70 years, that radio was a fundamental form of entertainment. In terms of not just in terms of news or music or all the things that we associate radio with as a sort of companion voice to your soundtrack to your life, where you're kept company by the cheerful DJ through the long afternoon at work or whatever it is. That actually it was for the longest time a water cooler moment where everybody gathered to listen to Grace Archer die in the barn fire in the those great moments in drama history where radio serials as well. The they were they were the most exciting form of entertainment, and there was a great demand for that. And I think they obviously eclipsed by television to the point where we forgot that radio was a brilliant means of communicating drama and storytelling. And so when the rise of the audiobooks, I think when they first came along, apart from specialist applications of audio, it was, I think, very often seen as a cheap way to make more money off something. That if you put out the audiobook version of a book, it was to persuade some people to spend some more money on that same product. Sort of. But back in the 80s and the 90s, and it was a very expensive thing to do. You would inevitably get an abridged version of a novel because that's all they could afford to do, or it would cost you a vast amount of money to get a box with 47 cassettes in it, and that, it was almost like it slipped slightly into a technological hole. And the advance of technology, the fact that we can now carry these things with us easily and in intensely portable ways, has reminded us, because that voice in the head companionship thing is something that we just take for granted now, that wherever we're going, we've got that point of contact. And we've sort of been reminded about the power and effectiveness of radio without anybody reminding us that radio was doing it for years and years and years. We've sort of, it's almost been embraced as, this is completely new. And it's like, it's not, it's just the way we're getting it to you is completely new. And I think that's a really interesting thing. And when, wearing my non-2000 ID hat, I write a lot of novels about toy soldiers, and they are very popular, and I enjoy writing them. And I was sort of surprised when the publishers started to produce, first of all, abridged, and then full unabridged audio versions, which were available on MP3. And I thought, well, that's an odd thing to do. And even I, as a fan of radio, went, that's just a way of getting more money out of the people. Until I realised, and it was very specific to the fact that it was based on books attached to a hobby, but it gave people an opportunity to engage with the universe whilst they were doing other things. As I say, I listen to audiobooks. It's the thing I do in the car, because I can't watch television in the car. I've tried; it didn't end well. And it's a way of engaging your mind in a way that doesn't also interrupt you from doing something else. And so, for instance, with Warhammer is a really good example. Is that people spend an awful lot of time painting their armies. So they would sit there and listen to the stories whilst they painted their armies. And suddenly this exploded, and people wanted to do that. They wanted to be able to engage with that fantasy world that they love so much, when they could not otherwise be reading a book or playing the game, and they could literally do it anywhere. They could be there when they were jogging or on the bus or whatever it was. And I think that's and you say the sort of podcast revolution is doing the same thing. It's giving us more than simple top 10 hits and catch up with the weather and now Derek with traffic. It's more than that. It is a companionable voice that can stay with us and intrigue us and divert us whilst we're doing other things that we couldn't do in a visual format. And I think that's, like I said, that's not a huge innovation. We've been doing it for the best part of 100 years. What the innovation is that we'd forgotten that it was an innovation, and there are generations coming to it going, oh my gosh, this is so exciting, and this is a different way of doing it. So I think these things slot together. I honestly don't think that we sell many audiobook versions of the Warhammer novels to people who don't already own the print copy, and that's not because we've just managed to fleece them twice and get the money out of them twice. It's because they buy the book for certain circumstances when they want to enjoy that, and they buy the audio for other circumstances, and those two things are useful assets. It's a format difference. So I think this is really interesting to see how this works as a format difference for comics, as you're saying, which are you couldn't have a more visual medium.
Yeah,
stories in them, essentially, with some gentle adjustments, are universal stories that could be told in any way, shape, or form. So here's a way of enjoying your comics with your eyes shut. Wow! Somebody should copyright that. I'll take a cut.
Well, it's one of those things you mentioned about, how many decades radio was around. I mean, radio changed the world.
Yes.
Instantaneous communication was mass communication was possible in a way it hadn't been before, and I'm very much reminded with audiobook translations of comics that. In many respects, football commentary would exist if you hadn't had to learn how to do that on radio, but then when TV comes along, you go, well, surely you don't need a commentator anymore. You can see what's happening, and yet
no, you absolutely do.
Vital to the experience because it's all about information communication.
Yeah. And that opens the door to a huge possibility, which is to actually have commentators on comics. So we have an audio adaptation of a comic with a commentator going, and for those of you watching at home, Judge Dredd is the one with the hat, which I think would be great. That's a whole new thing. But we have reached a point, I think, where the modern version of radio, that is to say, modern audio dramas and audio books, have reached such a stage where it is very easily possible to be, as it were, selectively a connoisseur of those things. That there are certain voices, certain voice actors that you really want to hear because if they're going to do it, it's going to be particularly good. So you have the same sort of appeal in an audiobook, sought after narrators and sought after actors, in the same way that a TV show will succeed or fail based on the performances within it. And actually, there are certain things that I've still got on audio. In fact, I've still got some things on tape. Not that I've got anything to play them on, but things that I had, which I've kept because they are particularly great versions of things. I've got somewhere an old tape version of Leonard Nimoy reading Heinlein. And I kept that because it's Leonard Nimoy and his voice is amazing, listening to him narrate those things. Similarly, Christopher Lee reading some Dennis Wheatley Duke de Richelieu novels, which should be available. They may well be. They are so brilliant, unabridged Dennis Wheatley novels of the character that he played in The Devil Rides Out. And he has got the most, we know he's got an extraordinary voice, but he's got the most extraordinary narrator's voice. And I kept those long after the point where I could no longer listen to them because I didn't have the machine to play them on, because I went, I don't want to get rid of that. That's such an amazing thing. So it's not just like, oh, thank goodness there is an audio version of something. We are now able to discern and be discriminatory about the quality of those things. This is a good version. That's a bad version. These are good voices for this. And again, I think that's why it matters that we've got a great cast on Brink. It's not just that we've got a great cast. Oh, aren't we? Look at us with our cast. It's not just a matter of showing off, and it's not even a matter that they will, I'm absolutely sure, be brilliant for the roles that they're playing because they are very talented actors and actresses. What really matters is that this will be a particularly good version. It's been cast well in order to make that drama work to its best possible thing. I'm sure, I've never looked, but I'm sure there are websites where people review comparative versions of audiobooks in the same way that we would argue about what's a good movie adaptation of Pride and Prejudice. Those sorts of things matter. It's not just is there an audio or isn't there an audio? Is that what's the best audio of the ones available? So the actual quality of it becomes an important thing, and that shows a discernment of an audience that is becoming used to the fact that it's their state as an audience isn't just can I get it on audio, but I want the best version of this on audio, which shows to me that it's a maturing format already.
Absolutely, and it's what I love about the discussion. Not just Nina and Richard and Indira, but also you've got some sci-fi royalty in there. You've got David Warner, who was in Tron, for God's sake,
and the Time Bandits, please.
Do you know my first thought when I saw his name come up on it? I thought how weird it was that the first time I ever saw him in anything, I saw his head getting chopped off by sheet glass, and now he's in this, which is so weird.
You've also got William Hope, who was in Aliens.
Yes. And I actually know him because I wrote Alien Isolation, the video game sequel to Alien, and he was one of the actors cast in that in the cutscenes, and I met him and worked with him when we were doing the cutscenes. So when he was suggested, I went, oh, absolutely. I'm sorry, he's brilliant. I like him very much, and I knew that he would be absolutely the right sort of person for that voice. So it's terrific choice.
One of the things that I did want to kind of touch on, and because you two are the perfect people to talk about this, and that's like when Penguin approached us to do these. We've already mentioned the Sandman adaptation that was done. It was very popular, but sci-fi is going through a massive boom at the moment. Like, you know, they said it in their press release, you know, it is one of the fastest growing sectors in publishing at the moment. And so what's interesting, and Dan, you already referenced this, is that, you know, Brink is the new kid on this particular block. You know, you've got the Pit and America for Judge Dredd, you've got Halo Jones, you've got Slaying the Horn God, all published 20, 25, 30, 40 years ago. But Brink is kind of, I guess, the purest sci-fi we've done 2000 AD for a while. So I just wanted to get your feelings on whether you had noticed, you know, how there'd been a resurgence in the popularity of sci-fi, and I mean, I've my theories as to why that is over the last few years.
Mine are a bit like yours, then.
Yeah. No, I think there are several good. I think it's worth pointing out certain trends, though. If we're talking about audio fiction and drama, first of all, just in terms of audio fiction and drama, which has gone through, which went between the demise, not demise because it's still going, but between the waning of audio drama on radio to the rise of audio drama now as a portable and purchasable format, on the back of the podcast boom and that all that kind of stuff, is that it didn't die away completely. And wasn't completely eclipsed by television, but there were certain elements of it that stood very, very strong. And one of the most obvious things is Big Finish and its Doctor Who series, which has run successfully for an incredibly long time, continuing the adventures, and that is obviously science fiction. So so I think there is an audience that associates audio with science fiction for the very simple reason that the pictures are always better on radio. You know, the imaginative possibilities are greater there. So where an awful lot of people weren't doing audio dramas anymore because they were passé and they were old-fashioned and they were radio, and television does it better, and so does movies and so do video games, there were certain areas that were being maintained thoroughly, even through that period. So it doesn't surprise. I mean, yes, we are wonderfully in a sci-fi boom, and long may it continue. But it's almost, in terms of audios, I think science fiction was leading the way already. It was something that was already displaying the fact that it was compatible with the way audios work. And as to why science fiction is booming now, I think well, quite clearly, science fiction explores all sorts of speculative things. And in a world that makes increasingly less sense to no matter where you are on the political spectrum, makes increasingly less sense, and a world that seems to be in a kind of metaphysical crisis as well. I think people are looking to science fiction as a way to perhaps speculate and answer some of those questions, or even, you know, predict the worst or best case scenarios that are coming on. So science fiction appeals that way, but science fiction also is quite literally an escape. Fiction is an escape, but science fiction is the greatest escape. And even before the pandemic began, but certainly with the pandemic, people are looking literally and metaphorically for ways of getting out of their situations, of losing a few minutes, be it on you know, Arrakis or Gormenghast or wherever it is they're going. That is a wonderful thing. We've seen the sales of audio dramas or audio adaptations, audio versions of a lot of science fiction just go through the roof. Science fiction generally just go through the roof because people are spending more time reading, seeking out things they want to read, and escaping into those worlds. I have, you know, I am accessible via social media, so I get messages from readers now and then, and usually they're very nice, and they usually say thank you for inventing this character or telling that story or whatever like that. In the last 6 months, it started just a slow trickle to begin with after the beginning of the pandemic. In the last 6 months, I am getting probably 10-20 times the amount of emails and messages from people, because they are genuinely appreciating that these things offer an escape. And I think that's a tremendous thing. I mean, the people are reading books, they're reading comics, they're looking at movies, they're looking at things to stimulate and fill their minds and actually allow them to step out of the door, and possibly step out of the door and not into the world that exists outside it at the moment, which is for many reasons not the best place to be.
Ian was looking thoughtful then, and I thought he was going to jump in.
I had nothing to. No, no, it's just like, yeah.
No,
in terms of, oh God, now I've got to form a coherent thought. No, that's it. The 50p's run out. I think it's yeah, there's an element of the shift in, because we see that throughout history in terms of the sort of writing that comes around, isn't there? There's sort of a reaction to the present environment and what's actually happening in the world. I think there's a degree of that where there's a bit of hopelessness or looking for some hope somewhere. And you certainly look to things like science fiction, I suppose.
In all its forms, I think. You look to science fiction in all its forms for different types of escape. It could just be simple, good, fun, exciting, escapist entertainment. And that's great because it takes your mind off what's going on. It could be something that offers speculations and possibilities about positive ways that the world is going to go. And that's reassuring. It's almost like you're looking for answers. But even if it's something quite dark and dystopian, you're looking for warnings, or you're looking for just proof that people can find some way of existing and coping with those things should they come along. I mean,
just thinking about the fact when the outbreak happened right at the very beginning, there was a massive amount of people that watched Contagion on streaming. And I think, I might be wrong, but I think the Pandemic board game sold out as well. I'm not quite sure if that's true, but certainly we do know that Matt Hancock actually watched Contagion because he based his entire thought processes on it. But I think that was like all of a sudden, I don't know whether that's sort of I don't know if that's like doom watching or whatever it is, but there is a sort of tendency to go to the things that are like that, I guess. There must be, but within society.
You can often be wanting to get a handle on things. I think perhaps people
put it in a perspective
because it says it holds out the possibility that there is a future.
It does,
because there's also the vicarious nature of it as well, isn't there? So you was trying to look for a solution or trying to see that there's some hope of a solution that way. I mean,
like I said. Just yes, looking for a solution. I mean, the Brink is I was going to say Judge Dredd is not the most positive future that you could possibly say to people, but Brink is, if anything, worse. I mean, it postulates. If Matt Hancock watched Contagion and from that derived the government, I was thinking maybe Bill Gates should read Brink, and that's his blueprint for how to save the climate crisis. Is we all get in spaceships. I think it's either looking for solutions or it's simply looking for a way of tolerating something. If I think this is bad, that's worse. But look, they're okay, or they're tolerated. It's almost like putting your hand in the flame and going, "No, I can take that." I think that's so. Escape is in different directions. I say there is a complete escape from something into something completely other, or it's escape into a more extreme version of the things that you're trying not to think about, which allows you to think about it safely. I think it allows you to think about it safely and more methodically and put it into sort of some kind of perspective. That's my theory.
Obviously, this is an adaptation of just the first 3 books. Of Brink. Now, I think we've touched on this before when we've talked about the series, but what's in store?
Well, we've had book 4 in the prog, but collected that's coming in November. I think that's right, and that'll be here tomorrow. The way the things are. And that's Hatebox, which is the one where we explore the sweary side of things, and then we're working on book 5. I'm always really nervous in these interviews because when you ask questions about like character and stuff, I'm always like, am I giving too much away? I'm just worried about what we've covered.
Yeah,
there's 5 books now, and I'm sort of sitting there going like, did we actually tell people about this? It's like really nervous. But yeah, so if I draw a blank while talking, that's why, because I'm sitting there going, have we actually said this? I don't know. And then in book five-
Michael's. I was going to say. Michael said it's the audio's coming along. It's just the first 3 books. And I'm thinking that's huge. I'm amazed they're doing that much because Brink, because of its pacing, has Matt has commissioned it. Each season of Brink, each book of Brink is longer than your average 2000 AD season. They you know, he's very generous with the prog space we get with it. So I thought when they said they were going to do an audio adaptation that it would be the first book, which is sort of a complete story. It's a complete case, but it's the first 3. That's a massive amount of storytelling. So they're being incredibly generous with it, and that's incredibly exciting. As Ian said, that, you know, book 4 is already out there, and we're working on book 5, and we have. It's one of those things is that the further we develop into Brink and it remains popular and therefore gets recommissioned, we take our story slightly further. We have got a certain set of sort of end goals in mind, and it's not like we're putting off getting there just to drag it out. But the more we do it, the more we go, oh my God, we could do that. And we find another thing to slot in there. So I don't want to say too much about book 5, except the fact that it's I think it's going to please people enormously. But book 5 is is going to be surprising in certain ways. With it, we've deliberately and with great abandon messed about with things quite a lot to produce a slightly different effect, different ways of looking at the material that we're handling. And I think it's going to be extremely effective. I would say that, wouldn't I? But you know, I mean, I am quite excited by this. But I sort of don't want to give away what the thing is that we've done, because I think it's lovely because it kind of, in the first episode or 2, you go, oh wait, okay, I see, and then you get it from a different angle. But it is interesting. But we have not only are we working on book 5 now, but we have book 6 sitting in the wings. In as much as book 6 would have been book 5, we were all ready to go with it, and it's such an exciting story. But we suddenly realised that we had this terrific idea that wouldn't work if we did it after book 5. It had to work in this order, so that's become book 5, and it's proving to be quite bleak. It's probably the most Lovecraftian one so far. It's the kind of the darkest and most sort of mysteriously odd, because we're getting we're seeing the story from different angles, and it is a very, very dark and bleak way of doing it. But each book has its own sort of trademark quality. So there is a particular thing we do in each one, like the sort of upstairs downstairs of book 3, or the going home swear box things of book 4 and that kind of stuff. They've each got or the empty habitat of book 2. They've each got their very distinctive thing going on. And so this is book 5 I would sort of describe as this is Brink as directed by David Fincher, making an FBI case out of, so you know what I mean, that kind of really forensic detail thing. So each book has got its own theme, and kind
of like Zodiac in a way.
Yeah, like Zodiac or Mindhunter, I think.
There's I think we're allowed to say what it's called, aren't we?
We are allowed to say what it's called.
It's Mercury retrograde. And the funny thing is that you remember when we went to San Diego? You remember this trip, Mike? I
certainly remember the hangovers. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was traveling, on the day that I was traveling, I kept updating to my social medias, and I kept saying Mercury retrograde the whole journey, because apparently you're not supposed to travel when Mercury is in retrograde. It turns out, because it's bad for travelers. It turns out. I don't know how I picked up all flying as well. That was the other one. And I'm not superstitious at all, so I kept including it because I kind of find it funny that it was the case, and it turned out to be true. It was a 32-hour journey in total, so it was a bit of a nightmare. But yeah, that's kind of where and then that stuck with me when we came to doing this one, and then that came up in conversation because it fits perfectly with the world of Brink, with Mercury. But yeah, and it kind of sums up what we've done with the book in terms of like where the story is taking place and stuff like that. Am I saying too much?
No, I don't think you're saying too much. I think it's nice. We certainly had a struggle. Like I said, early on, we had when we were doing book 1, we had this idea that the format of this, if it was successful, the format of this thing going forward was each season would be a different story set in a different place. And then we completely threw that up in the air when we realized the sort of condensed solidity of the personality of Bridget, and we didn't want to leave her alone. So having done 4 books like that, this is the point where we've gone, let's just see what we can do by playing around with some of the things that appear to be the unvariable qualities of this strip. And it is for a book, and then we can see what happens after that. So I think we've I guess we've got more confident with it. We've got more confident, and we've got layers of story that we want to tell. So we're finding ways of doing it, and like I said, we've got a kind of game plan, and we don't want to cheat the readers either by stalling too long before we get to the things they really want to know and becoming, I don't know, Lost or something. And by that I mean capital L television series. But by the same token, we don't want to become Game of Thrones and just go, oh, you wanted the ending, here it is in a bucket, bang. There's the, I think the painstaking pace of Brink demands that we take the story elements that we have and we deliver them properly and give them proper weight rather than dealing with that. So it's everything you do is an experiment. The Brink appears to have been incredibly popular so far. People really, really like it. At whatever point we get the impression that they're not liking it as much, we'll either think, well, it's time to end it, or it's time to change up what we're doing. Maybe we didn't get it right at that point. Maybe that's it's the unpopular season, which any long-running show has, the one season where they got the recipe wrong. I don't know, but I think we've got a really cool recipe for this, what we're doing at the moment, and like I said, it's the creepiest and most sort of disturbing one that we've done so far.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thanks very much indeed to Dan and to Ian, and also to Kate and Chris and Pat for a bit of a bumper episode. I hope you're excited about the adaptations that are coming out tomorrow. Head along to Audible or 2000AD.com to find those and get your orders in if you haven't done already. I've listened to them, really enjoyed them. It's interesting to see different decisions made, because obviously there were audio adaptations in the 1980s. We had Dirk Maggs on a few years ago, who was the producer on those. And also Big Finish did a whole bunch of original 2000 AD adaptations a few years ago. So this is something, that's a bit different, but much, much wider audience. Audiobooks are such a big market at the moment, and sci-fi doing particularly well. So looking forward to seeing how these go down. In the meantime, we'll be back in 2 weeks' time with an interview with a bit of a favorite artist of mine from the 90s, Simon Jacobs, who was the artist on Armored Gideon, which is a collection, a digital collection that's just come out through the 2000 AD web shop and app. So in anticipation of chatting to him, why not go along, download that, and visit The Edge with Armored Gideon. But great chat with him. See you in a week's time, Earthlets. Take care, and splendid Verthwig.
Alert! 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 Fill power levels dangerously high. Alert! Alert! Read 2000 AD every week. Ask your comic book store or newsagent now. Subscribe to the galaxy's greatest comic at 2000ADonline.com.